schedule that they had for the rest of it.
Or Friday evening doing safety check.
You could do, yeah.
I have the track available.
It was either Friday night or might have been a Friday or a Saturday. Might have been a Saturday too. After the track cars were off, again they took you out if you wanted to stay. And they basically said, anybody got a pickup truck or a van? Okay, good, hop in, let's go. And we'd fill it up, drive to a corner. The instructor would get out and say, here, but you drive to the next corner, take a look at this, and then walk up. It takes a while, but
Yeah.
it was just fun to be on the track, first of all. And it's such a different look. I didn't know this was over here. You know, that kind of thing.
Right.
I didn't know it was tilted like this.
Well, you don't know what a road is like until you actually walk on it or ride a bicycle on it or something. You slow down.
I've done a couple of video runs that they have at Barber, and I never finished very well because I usually stop and take a look at
Yeah.
the corners.
You're going, oh,
Yeah, I might ride a bicycle, but I'm not a runner.
yeah.
I'm not a runner either, so that's why I don't finish very fast.
I can't run on pavement anymore ever since my knees started buckling. Like if I take more than 10 steps at speed on pavement, my knees start to have this like sharp pain.
When do you get older? You're a kid.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, right.
I'm 26 and I'm already falling apart. All right, sorry about this. I'm gonna go ahead and get this.
Cycling's great. I don't cycle anymore because I got a dog that likes to run.
Excuse me. Well, that's actually a really good place to start because the kind of the attitude and literally if you buy an Apex Pro off our website, I just edited this, the automated email response. The first sentence is, if you think you can just slap this on your dash and go faster, this is the wrong product for you. Basically, we're asking you to have an open attitude and an open mindset. And if you don't have that, then you can return it. Basically, it's kind of strongly worded, but I've realized that going fast is 100% about how you approach it, your mental approach. And the more time you get on the track, the less track time matters, and the more deliberate practice and deliberate attitude adjustments and stuff like we're talking about now, like track walks, make a difference. So data can serve a lot of the same purposes as a track walk. You're not going to get the subjective nuances, which are really important, but you do pick up on a lot of things that you don't realize are happening because of our perception behind the wheel. You know, when we get behind the wheel, we start to have that horse and blinders approach where your vision starts to decrease. Right? It's just natural because we're at speed. We're not necessarily intended to be driving 100 miles per hour through corners, right? So we have to focus on deliberately getting our vision to our peripherals to start, opening up a little bit. And so that's a lot of times what happens in our learning curve as we start to get faster, is when we get to kind of the intermediate level, our vision now is much more accepting and much broader. We have much better awareness. But now we're still having to go back and think about the way we were taught. And a lot of times, and not pinning blame on anyone in particular, but there's not a lot of standardization for how drivers are taught through the DE organizations around the country. So DE organizations teach people the best way that they see fit. PCA Alabama region, the line is the way to go. Drive the line. And a lot of DE organizations are that way. Other DE organizations are more focused on breaking a straight line, get off the brakes for the corner early on, that kind of stuff. And I understand a lot of those approaches, but and Al and I had a long talk about this at the last Data and Donuts, and we agree on the same page that we want to teach drivers. We don't want to teach you something that you have to unlearn from an early stage, right? We want to teach the proper techniques from the beginning until you get to the advanced level, right? Because they're the same things. The messaging on how you teach it's a little different. You don't say, okay, we're going to go into turn 5, we're going to brake at threshold, and we're going to trail brake, release as we get into the corner to a novice, right? Because that's like 3 words that don't make any sense, right? So what we would say to a novice is, we're approaching turn 5, we're all the way on the throttle, right? All the way on the gas. We're going to come off the gas and go hard on the brake pedal very quickly, right? Very hard on the brake pedal.
No coasting.
Right? Exactly, no coasting. And then when you turn the wheel, we're going to release the brake pedal. And we're not going to pop off it. We're going to slowly release the amount of pressure on it. So it's just a wording difference that has to be used. So we can use data to verify our technique. So a lot of what we focus on is using it as a coaching tool to learn enough about what this is showing us, not necessarily to go, oh, this is my speed trace. I need this to be this much higher and blah, 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 blah. That's stuff we can get into later, but mainly what we're trying to do is look at it and go, what does this say about my technique? So that's kind of the goal with this. And Paul, of course, as you have specific questions, we are using an example of my data from Doug. Come on in.
Hey, good morning, Doug.
Sorry, I got confused. I was doing personal training across the street.
We're
Axe throwing.
working on the after.
We're flipping tires.
There's a rolly chair next door if you want to grab it.
Put him right by the monitor.
Yeah, exactly. So we have our live studio audience as well.
This is better than Folgers. Thank you.
It makes a difference, doesn't it?
It do.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's first of all, everybody, if you guys haven't already, or everyone knows each other, right? Might as well say names and maybe have you used anything to log lap times, DE experience, and maybe like a goal. What do I want to get faster? I want to get more consistent. I want to improve this technique, something like that. So I'll start. I'm Andrew. I said this last time. I've been sober for. My goal is to help share what I've learned with others, and also continue to approach the limit of every car that I get to drive in a consistent way, and also help to learn more about using data to make car changes, because that's kind of where I am. I've done a little bit of pro racing, a lot of club racing. That's my shtick. Paul, who are you? Tell us about Paul.
Paul Roddy, I actually am a teammate with Andrew. We own a car together. We just raced last weekend.
We won.
We did win one of the days. Yeah, luck fell our way. But anyway, I am trying to get into data more. I've done a bunch of races. I instructed DEs. I've done DEs for a long time. I'm trying to hone my craft and get better. I was a second slower than Andrew on average pace at the race, and I want to find out where that second is. So that's basically it. And you find it out through the data. That's it.
Who's this guy?
I'm Doug Neal. Been driving for more years than I care to admit, but have found that there's always a place to pick up speed if you're willing to work towards it. And what I have truly enjoyed about understanding the data is the things that what you may feel you're doing may not be the right thing. And data is a very telling tool in helping you to realize that, and hopefully change behavior. It is about a quick lap, and I like to chase them.
Excellent.
I'm Bobby Michelson. I'm a total newbie, and I just like, to think maybe I could learn to drive someday. So
You can. That's the good news.
that's about all I can contribute.
Yeah. Well, the gospel is that you can learn to drive.
There are no drivers that are born there, all made.
Teach an old dog new tricks.
That's right.
It's easy.
Michael Gilsher, I've been doing the PCA DEs for 4 years now. That's the only ones that I do. And I just like to learn how to interpret the data and be consistent. I feel like I move along reasonably well, but I like the consistency.
You drive a Cayman?
No, it's Boxster Spider.
Okay, Boxer Stop. Ooh, excellent car.
Pat, Andrew, Pat.
Ah, yes. That was RS Spider. I thought it was an old LMP2 car. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Mike Fedorenko. I drive a 944 non-turbo semi-track car. Been doing the East back in England now after about 4 years. I was there for a long time. I need to learn how to drive a momentum car, because I know that every time I let off the throttle or touch the brake, it takes me a long time to get it back.
Yeah.
And I'm a coacher. I need to learn to, get the data, use the data, interpret the data. I'm an engineer by training. I live and die by data. So,
Okay.
looking forward to this.
Great background. Looks like we had another. I probably should have put this in the conference room. I didn't know we had this many brave people here. We're not practicing social distancing, are we?
No, not today, not
We're comfortable.
I'm blocking your cameras, I mean.
Hey, Conway, too soon. Welcome. Come on in.
Morning.
Morning, good afternoon.
So if you don't mind, name, goal for this year on the track, what do you drive, and used data before?
Conway Huang. Not really used data before. I've mainly driven an M3, but I bought a Porsche last year. And I just like to apply data to my driving.
Great. Sounds like we got a pretty consistent message.
Out of us, how many of you all have Apex Pros? I have one. Okay.
Yeah, I have
Me
one
too.
already.
Also, yeah, Doug's is one of those right there. Excellent. So yeah, and feel free to stop me and ask product specific questions. I'm mostly going to focus on like technique related stuff, or just like maybe challenge some ideas that are more driving related, and we can talk specifically about data. We also have a webinar this week for the upcoming Chin event that's going to be very similar content to this, but maybe even a little deeper. So if you guys want, I can send you a link to that if you're free on Wednesday night. So let's talk just really briefly about what data is, and I'll use this obviously as the example. So we're connecting our phone to this guy, so all the data measurements are coming from hardware that's designed to measure, motorsports type accelerations, right? Hard accelerations. So the primary reason when you're using any data device, you want to use hardware rather than a compromised device, is what I like to call like a phone, is because the accelerometers and the GPS are sensitive enough to pick up on high speeds, high accelerations, that kind of thing. Your phone's only got maybe like a 1.5G accelerometer, so it knows if you dropped it. That's about all it can do accurately with the accelerometer, and a 1 hertz GPS. So the GPS samples 1 time a second. So basically, if you use a lap timer on your phone, your lap timer is going to be plus or minus a couple of seconds.
And that's why you're in the woods sometimes.
Right. That's why if you use Harry's lap timer with your phone, you look at your line and you go, I drove off turn 2 and I went up the grass embankment and came back. Yeah. So 10 hertz is 10 samples a second, which is kind of the requisite motorsport sampling rate. There are devices that have 20 hertz sampling rates. Honestly, you don't need that unless your average lap speed is well over 100 miles an hour, which at any road course in North America, we're not going to experience unless you're at most sport in an old Indy car or something like that. So that's a little bit about the hardware and why we use that. What we're looking at right here, and this is from our data this past weekend. It's an E36 M3, 200 treadwear tires, aero and splitter. Wing and splitter, suspension, some other changes. We're looking at the GPS satellite view of Barber. Obviously, we're probably all familiar with that. And then below, we're looking at what we call the speed trace. So these are the 2 things we're going to primarily look at for now. And then we might look at a couple other things, but I like to keep it, when we talk about introduction to data, there's 3 things we're really concerned about before we go too far, and that's speed, obviously important measure, speed, plotted against distance. So speed is going to be this axis right here. I did Lysol this screen, by the way, if anybody else puts their face on it or something like that. So this is speed, 120 miles per hour, 0 miles per hour. So the higher up, the faster you're going, the higher up the graph. The lower down, the slower you're going. And then distance over the track. So that's 1,000 meters, 2,000 meters, 3,000. So simply put, that's when you cross the start-finish line to start the lap on the front stretch. And that's when you come out 16 and cross the start-finish line.
All right, so to be clear, because I had a misunderstanding about this, the start-finish line, and this is different than, say, the transponder start-finish line, right?
Yeah, so the Apex Pro start line is back here, which is about the time you're upshifting from 3rd to 4th in most cars. The main reason being, you see how the track's really close right here? And there's a building right there as well. Basically, I have to make the coordinates as wide as possible in case you have satellites. So satellite, you have to have like 7 to 9 satellites triangulating your position to get accurate GPS position, GLONASS, everything like that. So if you have little tiny coordinates, I'm going this coordinate right here, this coordinate right here, in between that is my start finish. If it's real tiny, sometimes the satellites will change mid-lap and you'll lose that lap. So I like to make them big. So on tracks that double back on one another, I have to move them so that you don't accidentally cross it here. And then also big structures will distract satellite. Obviously, we can't get GPS signal inside the building. So that's another reason. And I like to cross pit lane as well to make sure that if you take a flat down pit lane, it also trips the timer. So it is a little different than like where the transponder location is going to be for a race. But for what we're doing for DE events, it doesn't really matter as long as we get the lap. So what we're looking at here, other than the speed trace, does that make sense to everybody? Speed and distance. So trending up and to the right is accelerating. So this is on the gas pedal. All that's on the gas pedal. What would this be then? That steep decrease.
Right.
Brake pedal.
And that's the little jigs that you're shifting.
Yes, sir. Exactly. Those little upshifts right there, that would all be shifting. See how they're consistently at the same place? That's a third to fourth upshift.
Is that manual?
Yes.
If you plotted a PVK, would those little chicks still be in there?
You wouldn't see it.
No.
Yeah. I can show you some
It's
PDK
cheating.
data actually. Yeah.
Then I
Yeah.
cheat.
Yeah. Yeah. A double clutch transmission shifts so seamlessly. If you were to really zoom in, you would notice a little hiccup, but it's not perceptible. Whereas almost any manual transmission car is perceptible, which is basically enough to defeat the argument that a manual is faster than a PDK. It's just not.
So,
Yeah, but at the times we were doing in this car, we were spanking a bunch of PDK powered cars in our class, actually, PDK shifted cars, which is interesting. And Barber, you really don't shift much, right? It's third and fourth gear. PDK might use second. You've got another ratio, but third and fourth gear in almost any manual transmission car, other than something with like a Corvette C5 style transaxle, they've got really long gear ratios. You use second and third. Cool. So we got the speed trace down. That's probably the most important graph that we need to understand for data, and that's the only one that we need to really understand for now. Simply because that's kind of the end all be all. When every pro team's debriefing, every single data point that they're looking at and they're analyzing is to influence this one. So basically they're going, okay, this is what the speed trace shows. Then they go a little bit further. This is what the G's are doing. Then they go a little bit further. This is what the driver's inputs are showing because they're measuring throttle, brake, steering. Then they go, okay, this is how the shocks are responding, right? This is what they keep going, right? But it all comes back to this. And I've got a couple of videos and stuff that explain it a little bit better. The good thing about what we're doing is we're not trying to go look at anything super granular when we're starting with data, right? In 3 years, we might be going a little deeper, but for now, we're honestly just looking at the shape of this speed trace. So if
Can you show us one that's in bad shape?
I can,
So we
see a bad one?
yeah, I mean, so we have a point of reference.
Yeah, absolutely. So that was
Now, I have some maybe minor bad.
all right. No, that was a good example speed trace. And first, before we do that, let me show you I thought I had some data from a PDK car. That was pretty simple. I'd have to find that another time.
No,
Does this one look a little different?
yes.
What do you notice that's different?
it's sharp.
Curves,
It's
Round
rounded.
sharp
cups at the bottom of the.
bottom.
So
And there's like some uncertainty there at the bottom of the first, between 0 and 1,000. Yeah, there's
Yep.
like, what am I doing?
Right.
Yeah.
What about this this little D10 at the top and that curve at the top? What would that mean if we're covering distance?
They're slow to get back.
Coasting.
Yeah, they're coasting.
that's off braking, yes.
What does the car do? So what would the speed trace look like? What would the speed trace look like if we just let off the throttle?
It would be round.
Yep, it would kind of gradually slow. It wouldn't be perfectly flat, right? It
Like
would
a
kind
roller
of,
coaster.
right? Because the car still decelerates when we're on throttle, right?
Mhm.
What would a flat speed trace? What would that mean if the speed trace was totally flat like that? Like, so let's say right here it just went flat line at the bottom. Basically what this one's doing right here at the very bottom. What would that mean the driver's doing?
Coasting because they're not getting back on it.
Well, we just determined coasting would be decelerating, right?
The brake to.
Or maybe
Yeah,
just
right.
We're getting
Not-
closer. I'll rephrase the
not
question.
accelerating, just maintaining.
What do you have to do with your feet on the pedals to not accelerate in a car on track, high in the RPM? Maintenance throttle, maybe 10% throttle, right? If you're in a corner, maybe more. So because we're going to be at, let's say we're in turn 5, this driver is coasting here for way too long in the middle of turn 5. So what he's doing there is he's braking too early. And then he realizes he brakes too early, so he goes back to throttle too early. But he can't go back to wide open throttle, he goes back to a little bit of throttle. And so we end up with this flat, almost totally flat curve at the bottom. So what if we were to pull throttle position data there, we'd probably see his foot just resting on the gas pedal, right? Just like a rest. So that's a good example of a bad speed trace for turn 5. So before we keep talking too much about shapes of speed traces, I want to talk about corner classifications or different types of corners. I find that it's like a requisite conversation for talking about the speed trace, because I can tell you all day long, you want speed trace to look like a U in a fast corner. But does that mean anything to you? Why? Okay, I know to look for that in my data, but why? That's a good example. Thanks, Corey. I did a private one-on-one data review session with Corey, so he's got some work to do to go fix that one. He knows what needs to be done. Let's see. I was still trying to find that. Might be on one of my other devices. We could look at Paul's data. That's from last year. We'll get back to Chris's data from this past weekend.
I prefer to look at my data from this year.
It's prettier.
That's a dig at me because we don't have his
Yeah.
data from this year.
Although it's not his fault.
I tried.
Our car fried stuff.
We had an electrical issue. None of the GoPros are being charged. It was an endurance race, so the Apex Pro was running for 9 hours. But interestingly, I have my own data.
Well, you did start every day, so
Yeah.
that explains.
Exactly. So let's talk real quickly, ignoring the speed trace for now. Yeah, this is Chris. Let's talk a little bit about the different types of corners that we see at Barber specifically. Did anybody else drive anywhere else in the Road Atlanta, maybe? Road Atlanta. NCM.
VIR.
Awesome.
Mhm.
Okay. So then we'll talk a little bit more about fast corners as well, because Barber doesn't really have any what we would call like extreme, really, really fast corners. Yeah. It's a little bit different than the uphill S's at VIR, right? Barber. Uphill S's at VIR, you're entering 120 miles an hour, and you're pretty much maintaining that speed the whole way through. The fastest corner at Barber, let's actually that's a good conversation. Anyone want to guess if there's a pro driver driving any car, doesn't really matter. What corner at Barber is going to have the highest speed at the apex?
Going into the museum turn.
Going down the hill like?
Which one?
Well, you already said earlier, G-force is largest at, up here. Yeah.
Right here, the most lateral G. What Doug says?
King.
Anybody want to agree or disagree with Doug?
I'm going to disagree and say 11.
Which one's 11?
Yeah, right.
11 or 12? Yeah.
I guess 11, just guess.
Those are all good answers. I'll say the typical like educator answer is going to be it depends, but I find that the apex minimum speed, which is going to be right here for the kink, and the speed right here in a really properly driven car are almost the same. Sometimes this one's a little faster. I will say this past weekend with the aero on the car, personally, my minimum corner speed here was identical to what it was right here. So these two corners would be the two quickest corners. Does anyone want to take a guess at is the track going uphill or downhill right here?
It's uphill.
Excellent answer. There's an altitude channel on Apex Road that we can use to see that as well. So if I take the slider right here, might be familiar with that, and I plot altitude down here. This is GPS altitude. This is interesting. Lowest point on the track is right here. But look how much climb and elevation there is all the way down the back straightaway. So the kink isn't only uphill, it's very uphill.
When you're on the track,
up
okay.
in the car, you don't.
It's imperceptible in the car. Yeah.
Maybe in the first part. I never realized that.
When you look at the kink, if you stand in the spectator area and look backwards at the kink, it's almost like trying to line yourself so you're looking down the track. There's a lot more turn there than you think when you're going through it in your car. You go in your car. When you go back and look, there's major changes in direction, both left and then to come back right. And then when you come back right, the track seems like it's tilted a little bit to want to push you outside. So again, in the DE school, they always say,
watch out, pay attention there, get it right, and there's room we can mess up. But that turn is like, I don't want to say intimidating, but it's like, okay, pay attention to what you're doing.
Yeah.
Okay, that kind of thing.
Has anyone had what we would call a moment there? A moment?
Yeah.
What, if you don't mind sharing, Paul, what input did you give the car that caused that moment? What'd you think? And we're talking about the peak, the fastest. We'll say it's the fastest corner on the track for conversational purposes.
The moments I had, fortunately, weren't self-induced. They were either traffic-induced or weather-induced. Although the weather, I guess, could be argued self-induced, right? Yeah, or took it too fast. Yeah. I think you had a similar moment. No, yours moment was coming out of the museum, but same thing, tracking out, slow traffic.
Mm-hmm.
And I tried to unwisely go track right around the traffic while the car is tracking out.
Yeah.
And it just wasn't going to happen. So I got a little bit of a tank slapper there. And the other was water related, so it wasn't. But both times it was at the exit of the kink where the car wants to come out. And in both cases, I tried to pull the car in, which is never going to be a good thing, but you think you have a little bit left over. So in both cases, I went off track left, and
So you were out here,
Yeah.
and you're asking the car to go.
asking the car to
Right.
come back in. Yeah.
Yep.
In both cases, I thought, well, it can do it, and in both cases, the car refused to do it.
Yeah. Has anyone ever come through here and gotten in maybe a little quicker than they wanted to and gone like this on the throttle? Whoop! Off the throttle as they're turning back here? Don't try it. Just asking for conversational purposes. That's usually when you see, I can't remember the last time I saw it. I've seen probably 3 or 4 cars ahead of me going to this inside wall over the years. Most of them have been 911s, but mostly just coincidentally, I would imagine. But this is a fast corner, so I'm going to stop the car's position at the apex of the kink right here. Get as close as I can. Yeah. So we'll say we're at about 95 miles per hour through the middle of the corner. So he's got a lot of steering, probably squeezing back the throttle right there. What happens if we let off the throttle at 95 miles per hour with steering in the car? What happens to the weight? Do that for everybody, right? The weight's going to go which way? To the front tires. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And what's that going to do to our steering? It's going to make it more effective, right? So where's the car going to go?
Where your wheel is.
Where your wheel is. So all of this is to make the point that fast corners are different than slow corners. And this is something we don't talk about a lot as we kind of come up through the DE ranks, but we have to treat the balance of the car more delicately in high-speed corners than in slow-speed corners.
So your thought process is, okay, if I go in, it's minimal inputs in fast corners, because number one, you don't have time, and two, if you do over, you don't have time to come back, fix it, right?
And it's also, think about if you say we're going 95 miles per hour and you turn the wheel this much, does it make a pretty substantial impact on where the car goes? Right? The car goes, whoop.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You're on the interstate and somebody slows down dramatically in front of you and you go, whoa. Car goes pretty quick, right? What if you're at 20 miles per hour and you're in a parking lot and you do the same thing, same amount of steering input? Does the car respond as much?
Mm-hmm.
It does not. So at high speed, can we say that the car responds more quickly to driver inputs? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
No matter what that input is, everything except more throttle, brake, steering, car's going to go, right? It's going to be darty. So when we respect that, and it's kind of just inertia physics, right? The faster we're going, the more that, if we have 2 fuzzy dice hanging from the rearview mirror, they're going to move more with the same amount of steering input than they would at slow speed. Does that make sense? Therefore, we have to approach the corner a little differently. So in high-speed corners, our priority is balance. So the last thing we want to do at this point on the track where the blue dot is to come out of the throttle, right? Come out of the throttle. We don't want to do that.
Or over-apply it.
Yeah, or over-apply it. And that would be the case in like a fast car. Doug's car probably would be a good example. If you have a lot of horsepower, if if you know, so our car's a little different. We're almost completely flat to the floorboard.
Full
through there,
throttle there.
right?
I learned you can't do that anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. And this does vary, you know, your input's gonna vary.
Excuse me, Fred.
Yeah, I've broken it loose. My moment was there a little bit too much throttle at the wrong
Too
time,
soon.
which is coming out of a BMW. You can almost go flat once you hit the apex, and it doesn't really matter. You know, it'll
Yeah.
stick. A little bit too much throttle application from the other car. Muscle memory is
Yeah.
a dangerous thing when you're driving a different car.
Yeah. Our car's really spoiled us there because we recently added a splitter and a wing. You can be very deliberate and almost aggressive with the car input there, and it won't call you out because it's so planted. But most cars, especially softly sprung street cars, you're going to have to lift off the throttle on the entry. You might even be braking if you have a lot of horsepower. But you want to make sure, you know, the goal is whatever you do from this point to this point, you do it minimally. If that makes sense. How does that differ from turn 5? What do we do in turn 5? What are we doing with the brake pedal? Let's say we're braking here, right? We're braking before the corner. You're probably getting off the brake pedal when you turn in, right? Or you're back off the gas. Exactly. So why would we get out of the brake pedal before we turn in a fast corner? Think about the weight. Why do we not want to have braking into a fast corner?
Which way on the front of the car,
Which is going to cause what?
you know, bite more,
Which is
and
going
it
to
makes it more sensitive to any input or wrong input.
exactly. So what we determined before is that the car is going to go more eagerly at high speed. We don't need to be braking into the corner to put weight on the front at 100 miles an hour because there's a lot of forces acting on the car at 100 miles an hour. And probably one of the biggest ones is the amount of air flowing over the car puts the car on the ground, unless you have a lot of lift. But it's probably going to plant the car on the ground a little bit more. Also, by net effect, your weight transfer of being on the throttle has started to subside. So when you come out of turn 5 and you stomp on the throttle, with the track, you can almost do that now. It's got so much grip. You go to the throttle hard. Where does the weight go? All right. What happens to, let's say those fuzzy dice are towards the back. What happens to the dice hanging from the rearview mirror as you start to go faster? Unless you're in a McLaren 720S. It starts to ease out. So by the time we're going 100 miles an hour, we're not accelerating as hard as we were at 50 miles an hour. Is that fair to say?
Yeah.
Right? So we've already got more grip on the front tires at higher speed. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
So all of this to say, we don't trail brake into a 100 mile per hour corner. So let's try to define what the speed limit is, for lack of a better term, on a corner that we do trail in with brake pedal applied and we're releasing it versus a corner that we don't. Does that make sense? Before we talk about what the speed trace should look like. Did everybody follow me?
Are you asking us what corner at Barber, or are you asking what speed do we think it would be?
That's a little vague. I was more just kind of
Okay.
putting it out there.
Okay.
So we know we don't trail brake into a 100 mile per hour corner. What would happen at VIR and let's say turn 10 south bend left at the top of the S's? Or maybe Watkins Glen, any turn at Watkins Glen. What happens if you go in and you're releasing the brake as the car goes in? Right? You're going to hit that blue guardrail real hard, right? So basically, our goal in fast corners is balance. So that begs the question: how do we know how fast the corner is? Because I just shared with you that Kink's probably a 90 to 100 mile per hour corner depending on the car. That's a really big question. But the track walk really helps. Any corner with an open radius. The Kink is faster. It is pretty tight because you mentioned before, Mike, that you said looking back here, there's a lot of turning. And I think this validates that. Look how much turning you actually have to do to get through here. It's pretty substantial. You can obviously see the GPS plotted line here is a lot less of a curve, right? Because you minimize that, but you still have to turn a lot.
What's creating the green line? Is that the ideal line? Or
That's the line that I drove on this lap right here.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, or not me. This is Chris Nicely, sorry, but this is the line the driver would.
Okay.
So when I tap one of these laps, that's going to change the driven line on the track. And then you see where it says long G right here? This channel right here is going to dictate the color of the line based on the variable that I've selected. So what I like to do when I look at data, so for the guys that have them, Michael, I like to look at longitudinal G. That's accelerating forwards and backwards. Red is going to be braking, green is accelerating. Because it makes a lot of sense, right? Oh, I'm braking right there, I'm accelerating right there. I'm braking right there, I'm accelerating right there. It's easier to look at that. It's a little more intuitive. Yeah.
So if you look at the kink and you in that plan view, you know, seems to me the ideal way to get through there is, okay, how do I get from the entrance to the exit with minimal steering input, okay, and take as much of the curve out as I can, but still stay on the track, using all the track and not scrubbing off speed because I'm screwed up or I'm wrong or something like that. So that's what's in my head.
Yeah.
But if you don't go in right, you're screwed.
Agreed.
You can't get it back.
Agreed. What
I know that from experience.
Yep. Would you say turning into early is probably the cause? So the biggest discipline that I think is key to this corner is identifying an exact turn-in reference before you turn the steering wheel.
BCA code.
Yeah. If there's a cone there, that's
There's a
really
cone.
helpful. I tend to use, this is pretty accurate to where I tend to use, but I tend to look at the end of the curving, and then my turn-in point is probably about a car length before that. It might vary a little depending on the car, but it's pretty similar with anything with 4 tires. The only car that I really say that I've changed that is hot lapping a 991 Turbo S at the Porsche school. That car makes so much, it accelerates so hard when you're on the gas pedal that you're almost turning in right at the very end of the curve, because all your goal is to get to throttle as soon as you can here, because you'll do 135 miles an hour within the straightaway, right? And that covers a lot of ground. But for most of our cars with reasonable amounts of power, under 500 horsepower, this is not going to be a super late turn in, but turning in too early is also problematic, right? The other big thing to point out that we're talking about altitude right here, look how steep the track is going uphill right here. It's still climbing. So anytime you slow down for the kink, you slow down a lot because the car's going uphill. And it's going fast. Cars slow down a lot at high speed very easily. So the biggest thing to think about here is if you're trying to go for more speed here, you're like, I want to go faster through the kink, right? I would say it's not a low risk corner because it's fast, but you have a lot of runoff, and all you need to do out here is straighten the wheel and take it if that's a problem, right? So it's not the highest risk corner on the track, that's for sure. But the key to going faster here is basically smoothing out your inputs. If you're lifting all the way off the throttle, try only lifting back to 20% throttle, and then sneak up on it, 30% throttle, 35, right? Little increments like that. To the point where, like in our car, I don't ever come all the way out of the throttle. I'm actually wide open throttle as I enter the corner, and about this point, I go back to about 50% throttle for just a little bit of weight transfer to the front, because the car has a high-speed understeer. You turn the wheel, and it'll just kind of drive off the track left. So I like to just relax it back to about half throttle and then ease back into it. And that's all that it takes. Now, this car's got a lot of grip. It's going to be different on the street car. But what I would certainly recommend is if you're lifting back here, lift in the same place, just lift a little less.
Andrew, you know of anybody that left foot brakes there?
It depends on the car, certainly. Probably the
It's got to be a high horsepower car.
Yeah, something
Going
really
brakes,
fast.
right?
If I was driving like one of the school cars, I would definitely consider it. If I was lapping one more than a hot lap, probably a decent idea. Something to implement, something that was really like a 4-wheel drive, a 911 Turbo might accept some left foot brake as you're driving straight through here and there's not a lot of load in the car. But probably not. Okay, so can we all agree that's a fast corner? So actually, before we even talk about the speed trace, let's talk about the slow corner. So fast corner, our priority is balance and basically minimizing driver input, right? Last thing we want to do is lift. If you ever see anybody hit this wall right here, it's because they lifted. And they probably didn't need to. And when I say lifted, I mean lifting after commitment back to throttle. Right? They probably didn't need to. They probably could have opened up their hands and gone out here. Right? It's the old axiom about teaching your kids to drive on the interstate, right? You drop 2 tires, you don't jump off the throttle and hit the brake, try to just slowly gather it back up. The faster we're going, the smoother we have to be. So that's a fast corner, distinctly different than a slow speed corner. Distinctly different. Who wants to pick an example of a slow speed corner? We've got 2.
Going into Charlotte's Way.
Charlotte's Web. Would you rather look at my data for this, just for your reference? Or do you want to
Yeah, that would be good.
Okay. So we'll go back to my fastest lap of the race for Paul's benefit here. Go back to the speed channel down here. Is the software stuff making sense for those of you using them? So this channel right here changes this. This right here changes this. Cool. All right.
And I just discovered that you could expand that lower graph to get a little bit more.
Yep. Basically, the way to think about this is any functionality you have on Apple Maps or Google Maps. You have here. Great. So let's look at turn 5. So how does anyone want to just broadly speaking, what's going to be different? See, I really optimized the turn in turn 5, going all the way into the grass. What's going to be the difference primarily in weight transfer in the car in a slow speed corner? What are we going to have to do more to manipulate the weight in the car than in the high speed corner? You saying yes, nodding? Yeah.
Because you're coming in, you're wide open, and then you're severe braking,
Loading your
whatever,
Yep.
and you're going downhill there. There's a crest
Yep.
about where that white dot is, I'm guessing.
Yep.
So you can't see real well. So
Yep.
if you're a chicken shit like me, you let off in advance of that because you're not quite sure exactly where the crest is. Okay.
Well, it's the same place every lap.
I know, it hasn't moved.
Good advice.
It hasn't moved.
Let's go back to the track walk discussion that we had, because turn 5 is a very specific it's a very specific corner, and I call it the most. I'll start with this one. When I learn a new track, I like to get comfortable in the fast corners first, because those are the places where you need comfort level, right? Slower corners it's easier to play with the car to figure it out. You can try more. In a fast corner,
You have less to lose.
right? You don't really want to experiment in a fast corner.
You don't lose as much.
All right. So turn 5 is what I call the most fundamental corner in Barber. At the track here. There's a lot of really critical mistakes that people make that cost an enormous amount of lap time here, and they're very, very simple. And they're not necessarily easy to avoid, but if we talk about why we want to avoid them and what we can do to avoid them, it makes a really big difference. So very important point that you said about track topography. What's happening in the braking zone, which is the red braking right here? What's happening to the track?
You're dropping down.
Downhill. Has anyone stood in this gravel trap?
No.
Oh man, it's very downhill. And again, I can pull up the altitude graph. This is just a GPS altitude measure. If Peter Krause was watching the live stream, he would say that you need a base station on the track in order to accurately measure it. Peter, I agree with you. I don't have $100,000 base station, but this dip right here is the altitude change in turn 5. So where the dot is, let's place it right where it starts to go down.
So it's only 5 feet
I believe it's 5, a little more than 5 meters.
of meters. Okay.
Yeah.
Meters. Got it.
Yeah.
It seems like a two-story building when you're standing.
Yeah. No, it's a pretty steep drop.
It's close to 30 feet.
Okay.
Difference
I
from
didn't
top
know
to
that was
bottom.
meters.
Yeah. It's a little more than 2 stories, 2.5 stories in the building. So the reference that I use for the hill is the corner worker station. That's where the hill is going to start to go downhill. See okay? Yeah. So before we talk too much more about topography, you'll notice, actually I'll tie up that comment with, if you're standing right here in the gravel trap and you look up here, you can only see to the corner station. You can't see beyond it. It's steep enough that you see the hill crest and then the track goes away. That's how steep it is. So we do have to adjust our driving accordingly because it's going to change the corner. What's also important about this corner is that it's got an interesting radius to it where it starts to tighten and then it almost continues. You want to like release the car after you hit this radius, right after you hit this apex or this inside of the curve, but you really can't because the corner continues to tighten. This part of the corner will go forward to where we're at the bottom of the elevation. That is where the car is back to the lowest point in the corner, and now we actually have more grip because we're going uphill. So we're talking about a couple things here. Slow speed corner. So what's going to be different than a high speed corner? What are we doing differently with the brake pedal? We're braking, and what are we doing as we enter the corner? Coming off gradual, slowly releasing. In a high speed corner, we wouldn't do that, right? We have to brake going into the kink. We want to brake and then get out, and then we want to be back on the throttle, right? Back on the throttle in high speed corners for balance. So at this point in the corner, we're going back uphill. We've already done our braking. This yellow right here is going to be neutral longitudinal G, right? So neutral longitudinal G, which is really important. This, if you're, for those of you using an Apex Pro, you might want to take a picture of this or just remember red, orange at turn in, yellow right at the apex of the corner, and then green only after the corner gets to, I guess, kind of most tight part.
So in that trace there, you started your braking just in front of the corner worker station on the right-hand side there.
Yes.
And then real severe braking down the hill. And then you can see the color change as you come off, goes to pink, I guess, versus red. My eyes are right here. Yeah.
Yep, that's orange and yellow right there.
Okay.
And good point on this. So you guys see how we go from accelerating to braking right here? See, there's a little piece of yellow and orange. That's just the inevitable transition. Yeah, that's me coming off the gas on the brake. So the first thing I want to do is I want to look at the speed trace, because what did y'all point out to me earlier at the top of the speed trace? Curve, right?
Where curves you're coasting.
Yep. What does at the top of my speed trace look like right here?
90-degree angle.
All right. Call that a sawtooth. The top looks like a sawtooth. That means you're going off brake, off gas, on brake, off gas, on brake. So even though I see a little bit of yellow right there, I'm not coasting before I'm braking because I have a sawtooth.
Mm-hmm.
If this looked like this, but upside down, then I would be coasting.
But at the bottom is pretty sawtooth, but then you got a pretty decent amount of yellow.
Right here?
Yeah. So you just hitting the brake quickly, but not hardly? Not hard?
We'll talk about it. Well, let's
At
actually.
the bottom is getting to acceleration again, right?
Mhm.
The apex.
So this is what we would call our minimum corner speed.
Well, so what are you doing at the end of the hard braking?
Right here?
Yeah, and the yellow.
You're still
You're
releasing
coming
the
on
brakes. You're
Oh,
coming
you're
off
coming
the
off.
brakes.
Okay.
Coming off the brake.
Okay.
You're still trail braking, and then when you're ready to accelerate, you're on it.
Absolutely.
Let's just say hypothetically, if you were coming into 5 there and you overbraked, which a lot of people tend to do, and they tend to go back to throttle right there.
Yep.
What color, how would that present differently?
Be a curve and yellow through it.
We'll use Corey's data again, because that's exactly what he was doing.
So that color transition is indicative. This is a question.
This is okay. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Is indicative of a trail brake
Yes.
or okay.
This is not tooting my own horn by any means. This is just, I know what I did in the car, so we can use this example. This is wide open throttle to threshold braking as quickly as possible, as quickly as humanly possible. Off the gas, on the brake, to the point of ABS intervention, very, very slightly, almost ABS intervention.
Mm-hmm.
When I get to about the beginning of the rumbles, maybe a little after the turn-in curbing here, I'm starting to very, very, very slightly release brake pressure. And then at my turn-in point, I'm coming off the brake pretty considerably, but not quickly, just releasing pressure. My goal is to not actually release the brake pedal, see where that turns from yellow to green until right there. That's where I actually release the brake pedal. And in this car, what happens here, the car has a pretty decent understeer tendency, but if I do it just right, I have this much steering in the car, and as I release, as I release the brake pedal, the car almost rotates on its own. I don't have to add more steering, so I'm not inducing more scrub. Now, what you'll notice if you're looking at your data from before the track repave, this yellow is probably going to, if you're doing it right, this yellow is going to extend further. There's a lot more grip on the new surface here, so I'm actually probably getting to throttle 20 to 30 feet sooner with the new asphalt on the track. So you're actually on the throttle a lot sooner, which is interesting. But this is indicative of a proper trail brake. Proper trail brake. Red, orange, yellow. Red, orange, yellow, green at the apex. Red, orange, yellow, green. Longitudinal G would be a proper trail brake. Let's look at an improper example.
Oh, wow.
That looks like we were passing, well, different satellite positioning. You see how the position of the line moves a little bit?
Mhm.
That's all satellites. He was probably a little closer to the outside edge of the track. Let me see if I can find a very clear example. Here we go. All right. Yep. See how that's green already?
He's overslowed.
He's overslowed big time. He's not going very fast to begin with. 95 right there. He's already coasting. See the speed trace right here? So we're using a combination of different things, but look at the speed trace on the entry. Big time coast right there. So by the time he goes to the brake pedal, he doesn't have to slow that much. Now he's overslowed, and he's going slower than he needs to in the middle of the corner, or for the car to corner, effectively, and then he's going back to throttle too soon because we see the green start right here. So while we're looking at this, and we'll address specifically what you're dealing with, Mike. Why is coasting defined by relaxing the gas pedal before we brake? Why is that undesirable other than it costs us lap time? We know it costs us lap time, but why is it undesirable from a technique perspective?
But you're not telling the car to do anything.
You're not controlling the car.
I like that as well. You're not communicating with the car.
The car's waiting on your brain. Yeah, your brain's like, what do I do?
Yep.
When the car's ahead of you,
Right.
so to speak.
Would you say the car brakes more effectively when you transition from rear springs loaded to front springs loaded, like a seesaw, or when you go from neutral to loaded?
No, it's more.
Let's think about it, right? You got all this weight in the back, right? That's pent up kinetic energy right there. Those are springs, right? What happens when you compress a spring? What does it want to do? Come back, unload. Yep. So we've got pent up kinetic energy in the rear, right? If we allow those springs to unload, and by putting the brakes on, they're going to go, okay, boom. Car's going to go on its nose, right? And that transition is going to cause the car to slow faster, right? Because we're going to not only exactly, our front tires get bigger. We can never achieve the same amount of contact patch on the front tires if we go. I like to think about it as change in weight transfer, delta and weight transfer, right? We want a big delta from accelerating to hard braking. Boom, boom.
At the end of the day, isn't it all about just managing your contact and your grip? Mechanical grip is really what we're managing around the track.
Absolutely. And when our hands are straight on the steering wheel, we can pretty much do anything with those two pedals that we want, right?
But you want to make that transition when you're going straight. You're not.
Right.
Because then brake and shift.
You're done.
Sometimes it plays it. Straight.
Right.
Yep, exactly. Brake and shift. Hard threshold brake. I like to think about everything as 100% of the tire. So we can only use 100% of the tire. When our hands are straight on the steering wheel, we can be 100% on the gas. We can be 100% on the brake, right? So it's not going to hurt us to go to 100% brake. Now, there's caveats to this, right? And that being, do you have ABS? Do you not have ABS? The balance of the car. Some cars are going to want not necessarily a progressive application, but the general rule of thumb that I use is into a threshold brake corner, 10A at Road Atlanta, 5 at Barber. 5 is the only threshold brake corner at Barber, by the way. We'll get into that as well. It's the only place threshold being defined as slow the car down as fast as you possibly can, weigh the anchor, whatever you got to do.
And dry versus wet.
Exactly. Dry versus wet. It's a good. Yeah, exactly. On the wet track, we're going to threshold a little more. So this is That's a decent point in some cases. So this is the only place on the track where we're going to be trying to achieve maximum rate of deceleration. We're not trying to just achieve the car getting to the speed it needs to be in the corner. This is going to be 120 miles per hour to 40 miles per hour in most cars. 110, right? 944, probably 100, maybe 105. Let's see what the M3 is doing. Let's see what Chris is managing. 102 miles per hour before braking. So we're looking at about an 80 mile per hour speed delta. So the rule of thumb I'll give you, and you can use this for advice anywhere, it works at every track. The bigger the speed delta, well, remember delta from like geometry, right? A little triangle defines change, right? Delta means difference. So from your maximum speed to your minimum speed is your delta. The bigger that delta is, the more important it is to brake as hard as possible. That makes sense? So going into 10A at Road Atlanta, how important is it to brake late?
I don't know which one 10A.
10A, the big long straightaway, hauling the mail, fifth gear, down the backstretch, downhill,
Oh, yeah.
left-hand corner, right?
Okay.
Brake as late as you can. Same thing here. 80 mile per hour speed delta is the biggest speed delta on the track.
Look at how steep that is right there. You know, you're stomping on the pedal.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely stomping on it. So anytime we have that big speed delta, it's very, very, braking late becomes more important. When we have a small speed delta, so let's look at turn one. Chris is doing, is this my data or Chris's data? I'm sorry, this is my data. We go back to my fast lap. In turn one, we're going from 111 miles per hour there to the minimum corner speed of 81 miles per hour.
Move your map up top.
Please. And where do you brake? I brake where that patch used to be. Remember there was a patch there? Yeah, that's where I hit my brakes.
In this car, to give you an exact reference would be hard. I probably accelerate. I probably wide open throttle until the two brake. But this, we have aero. Don't forget that. That's important. And the minimum corner speed's only. I know the minimum corner speed's around 80 miles per hour for the car, or I do now after looking at the data and thinking about it a little bit more. There's probably another mile per hour or two there. It always is. But look how much our speed trace, that speed delta is much less significant, right? This little guy right here compared to that whopper. Big difference, right? So that speed delta, when it gets smaller, 110 miles per hour on the straightaway, 80 miles per hour on the corner, 30 miles per hour. How important is braking late? Not as important, right? Not as important. Anybody play?
Well, but it is. If you brake early, then you're scrubbing too much speed. So braking late is important, relatively speaking.
Braking in the right spots is important.
Right.
Absolutely.
And later.
Right. But yes. And by late, I'm
It's not like when you see the curve, oh shit, it's coming at that straight.
Yes.
And then you see the curve and you go.
There's a bit. We'll say that the car to make the corner, you have to be on the brakes by the 2 board. If you brake at the 4, that's too early.
Right.
But if you brake a little before the 2, that's not going to hurt
pressure. It's not going to hurt as much.
That's not going to affect your lap time as much as if you brake half a board early in 5. Anybody play Forza or Gran Turismo with their kids or anything? Have you played a video game where you have the ghost car on the racetrack? I know you haven't. So it's a really good exercise to kind of think about. And this is the way I think about it. I was playing Gran Turismo and I set a really good lap time. And now my ghost car is doing my best lap time. So there's another car on this track playing the video game, right? There's a ghost car. We're going into turn 1, right? If I brake, let's say, a car length before him, but I carry more speed through the corner, how far is that ghost car going to pull by the exit? Probably not very far, right? He's going to pull a little because he's going to brake later, and then I'm going to carry more speed, so I'm going to catch him again, right? What happens if we do the same into turn 5? He's going to brake a car length later than I do. We're going to go in there, boom. Am I ever going to get that back? No. That's how I think about it from a speed delta perspective. The bigger the speed delta, the steeper the trace, the longer it lasts, the more important it is to brake late. So all I'm trying to do here is change our priority for many of the corners at Barber, because turn 1, I've got a 30 mile per hour speed delta, almost the same in 7. So this little guy right here, that's going to be the apex at the top of the museum on the right.
Mhm.
Turn 12 almost looks the same as that, right there. All those places, braking late's not our priority because it's not going to gain us lap time. 1 more mile per hour rolling speed through the corner is going to gain more lap time than braking 10 feet later, 20 feet later. So it's a matter of priority. Now,
So with a momentum car, my main objective, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, is I need to be maximizing my corner exit speed. Because every time I miss that, I can't get back. It takes me a half a lap before I get it back again, or some long time because I don't have the horsepower again. So if I do a steering input or a brake input, when I don't need to do it, I'm really just wasting time. I'm doing stuff that I don't need to do. Car's much more mechanical grip than I am willing to admit to use. If that's the right way, that makes sense.
Mhm.
yeah,
I'm still learning what the limit is. I don't know.
that's very true. I would say with all cars as well. And I like to talk about cars globally because the momentum car versus horsepower car is sometimes a little overplayed. It's a matter of priority again. Momentum car, you have to carry more speed through the corner. You can't sacrifice speed. Whereas in a horsepower car, your goal is to be on the throttle as much as possible because you gain more lap time, right? You accelerate a lot harder.
Mhm.
So in a momentum car, let's take turn 1 for example. In a car where you've already defined, okay, I have to carry more speed through the corner. That's what I was hearing. You said corner exit speed. In my mind, I was hearing this has got to be faster.
Yes.
Yes,
Mhm.
this has got to be faster. So
You're
We
not
need to-
likely at the same speed as a high horsepower car, so you don't have to use as much brake pedal
Right.
and as far back to be able to slow the car to make the turn.
absolutely, great reference.
Mhm.
You can probably brake later, but more importantly, what I like to tell people, especially for a low speed delta corner like turn 1, brake where you're comfortable braking, assuming we're going wide open throttle before we brake, right? There's no
Mhm.
coasting. Brake where you're comfortable braking, but use less pressure on the brake pedal. So if you go into turn 1 and before the track was repaved, you're hearing, anybody hear that? Over the bumps, tires block up a little bit right there? No? Maybe not. If you did, that's not good. That means you're in ABS. Turn 1's not a super hard brake input to get it just right because we're not scrubbing speed. 80 miles per hour is still really honking. That's as fast as we go on the interstate with this much wheel in the car. Right? That's fast. So our goal here is to carry speed through the corner. If that's our goal, brake in the same place, brake softer. And it will be way less intimidating and help you carry more speed. Because that brake pedal is not an on-off switch, right? It's a very precise instrument.
In my 2002, this is actually a left. I would brake with my left foot here.
I was going to ask that question.
Where I'm really just moving the nose forward because I'm not having to slow off that much speed. I'm not getting much over 100 miles an hour going in just because my car never got there.
Mhm.
I'm going to try to dim the.
I could literally just, it was almost a brush of the brakes with the left foot. And since I don't downshift until the top of the hill to brake
Mhm.
foot.
Yeah.
It slows me.
I was going to ask that question. So is that if you were a good left foot braker, that would be a potential opportunity for how to.
It's where I learned to do it. I'm not comfortable in it in the 944 now. But
This one is dumb.
just because it's different, I don't have the right brakes.
It had some options, move and select on the bottom.
So I was trying to dim the TV for the broadcast, but I turned it off instead.
Okay.
So Doug, you were saying that's a left foot brake in your 2002?
In my 2002, it's harder to do it in the 944 the way it's configured now, just because I've got so much horsepower and I don't have the confidence in the brakes because it's manual brakes. That's a little spooky.
Yeah, and
When I tried it.
if a good
I only tried it
exercise
once.
here is to watch the Spec Miata or Spec Racer Ford is kind of or Spec E30, any of the spec low horsepower classes. If you get a chance to go out to the track while they're racing,
And then left there,
I think Spec Miata is still brake, but I think it's
Yeah, it's more of a, I've noticed them just a brush to get a little bit of weight transfer. Yeah, it's just so brief and light. Yeah.
I think a big point of why most So we could define it this way. Our car, if we lifted probably at the floorboard, it would make the corner no problem. Turn the
Without
wheel
braking.
without
Yeah.
braking. Yeah, lift off the throttle.
Just the deceleration.
Yep. But the added element in turn one is what happens with elevation.
You drop some weight on
Where does that brake pedal put weight?
on the nose.
Yes. Where are we losing grip by the track going downhill? Front, right? The front falls off the cliff
Oh,
first,
got it.
right? If we're driving downhill, the front loses grip and then the rear loses grip, right? So that brake pedal, slight brake pedal, just before and precisely as we turn the wheel, helps those front tires get to the apex of the corner. So it's more of a balance thing than it is the car actually needs it. If I were to lift, I could probably still carry 82 miles per hour right there, but I'd probably have a lot more wheel in the car, a lot more steering. And we could do an exercise. I might have some data that could show it, but has anybody ever just watched your speedometer when you turn the wheel and coast? Your car scrubs so much speed when you turn the steering wheel, you wouldn't even believe it, right? Just the scrub of the contact patch is going to slow the momentum of the car down significantly. So that's something to think about here. That's probably the reason that the Spec Miata guys, Spec 30, those guys, they probably don't have to check up. They're probably only doing 95 miles an hour, and they probably only have to slow down to 85, right? Which could be done by coasting, turning the wheel. By the time they get to the apex.
Guys are amazing.
But they probably brake, maybe a little left foot, stay on the throttle just to get the nose of the car there.
Mhm.
We're carrying enough speed in our car that it's really prudent to brake.
Yeah.
It's not a hard brake. It's not nearly
It's
as
a
hard as
positioning
turn five.
almost, it's just set it up.
It's a telling the car what to do, deliberate control. I'm driving the car with the pedals. When we're at the limit of the tire, we drive the car with the pedals, not with the steering wheel, right? The pedals are what change the attitude of the car more so than anything else. So let's go back to turn 5 because that's kind of where we started. And topography, obviously, at Barber, but at any track is a really big deal. So we talked about not coasting. We want a sawtooth in our speed trace. So when you have your own data, the first thing to look at, the very first thing, this is super, super easy self-coaching. Tap your fastest lap. Start with your fastest, go to the next fastest. Try to look at 5 laps or so. And I'll look at just the top of the speed trace. And those at Barber, there's 4 places. Turn 1, turn 5, turn 7, turn 12, where we're going to get really distinct braking occurrences. So I'm just going to look at the top. That's all I'm going to do is open up the data and go, how does the top of my speed trace look? And if it's curvy, then I stop. That's what I got to work on. If I see a curve or if I see it decrease like that, then I go, oop, I'm coasting. But I want to look at more than one lap because you could have traffic, you could have extraneous variables. We got to look at multiple laps. So I would just go through here and I would toggle through these other laps and I'd go, okay, looks like I got a pretty good sawtooth shape, even on my slower laps. Okay, so that's not what I need to do. So that's me self-coaching. My release the throttle to brake application is good, so I want to go to the next thing. The next thing is the bottom of the speed trace. It's top to bottom. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. But let's keep talking about turn 5 where we've got a big speed delta. We're weighing the anchor, so to speak, and we're trail braking into the corner. This is a technique that applies at every racetrack in North America at some point, right? There's a trail braking occurrence. And this also goes back to what we were taught as students, which is something you might be more familiar with now, which is going to be get your braking done in a straight line is a common thought process.
Well, that probably leads to my questions. How much difference are we here in a rear engine car?
If it has 4 tires, it's going to be very similar. Very similar. There's going to be some subtle changes in priority, and there's going to be some adjustments that you're going to make that are different than a front engine rear drive car or a front wheel drive car. But I find that it's very, very similar. In particular, rear engine cars, if you do it right, really accept trail braking well, especially modern 911s. Older ones, you got to be really deliberate and patient. So the only difference I found in a rear wheel drive car is let's say I'm only starting to release the brake pedal from threshold braking right here in our car, in our E36. In a 911, it would be right here. Does that make sense? I want to start, I've got all the weight on the front, I'm braking really hard. in our car, it's got really even weight distribution, and it does tend to understeer a little bit, and it's very forgiving when you slide. Long wheelbase, got nice even weight distribution, so I can go in, release the brake, the car can slide, and I can go do, kind of catch it, go back to throttle. It's not a big deal. If I did that same thing in the 911, once the car got to a certain amount of rotation, it would start to spin very quickly. So all I'm going to do to counteract that is I'm going to start putting that weight over the rear tires a little sooner as I enter the corner. So instead of getting totally off the brake pedal, I'm just going to release the brake sooner. So I have the nose weighted. This is the front. This is the rear. Wide open throttle, all the braking. In my E36, I'm carrying a lot of brake into the corner. I'm starting to turn, and now I'm off the brake. In the 911, I'm just going to release a little sooner. That's the only real difference that I find, especially in a modern 996 or newer 911. You really don't have a lot of the effects to the point where in like a modern GT3 RS, you can trail brake the absolute living crap out of it. I mean, more so than in a front wheel drive car, because those cars have rear steer. They're designed to accept a lot of it. But that basically is just thinking about our contact patch as opposed to thinking about our car is a good way to do it. So with the rear engine car, when we're static, let's say this is the car just sitting here. You have four corners statically, not moving. There's more weight over the rear tires than there is over the front in a rear engine car. In a front engine car, a little more weight over the front than over the rear. As long as we know that going into it and we visualize how that brake pedal is affecting those contact patches, I find that to be the safest way to look at it. So I'll summarize that. 911, you're just going to release the brakes slightly sooner, which in your world you won't notice the difference. So you don't have to adjust.
I won't for sure.
That's interesting. So let's talk a little bit specifically about turn 5. I'm going to try to turn the brightness down real quick, but you can do it. Paul, why don't you share with us, what do you think you and I are doing differently in turn 5? Just subjectively. I know you don't have your data.
Yeah. My theory is that I'm slowing. I think I'm slowing maybe a mile or two an hour more than you. And I think I'm trail braking less. So you're carrying more corner entry speed than I am. And I also think because of your technique, you're probably getting back to throttle a little bit sooner.
Aha.
There you go. That's my guess.
Okay. Can you summarize that one more time for me so I'll actually pay attention?
Sure. I'm not worried about my input at the beginning of the brake zone. I think all of that's good. I think what I'm doing is I'm staying on the pedal full just a little bit longer than you. I think the data, if we had it, would show I'm probably slowing the car a mile or two an hour more than you. Not trail braking as much as you. Corner speed through the first half of the corner is probably a little bit slower than you. That's my guess.
Yeah.
So
I would agree with that. It's probably the difference is probably between turn in and the apex. Do you agree with that?
yeah, I would.
I would argue to say that the difference between any pro level driver and any of us, myself included, will be turn in to apex is where you're going to see the biggest difference. And it's almost always the brake release. Almost always. The driver that releases the brake the most efficiently and the best to balance the car is usually the fastest. So in this case, I would agree with you. I'm probably doing 1 or 2 more miles per hour than you at the tightest part of the corner.
Right.
Or apex somewhere in this. I could look at the speed trace.
And that's what I started finding later was, I think when we were talking while I was running, that rotation that the trail brake was giving the car, I started to see that, and I started to come back on throttle sooner. And I think that's when I started to see just a little bit, more pace. But
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that's my minimum corner speed. And the way that I find that is I just I drag a little slider forward until I'm at the trough of the speed trace. And then that speed right there is going to be my minimum corner speed. If you want to really sound like you know what you're talking about, just tell your friends your min speed. My minimum corner speed, my min speed. It's a good phrase. You'll hear it if you're talking to somebody that's
And
done data
isn't that
before.
really just a function of comfort? comfort with the driver in the car and the ability to, drive in that space of 6 inches where you trust and you know that the
Absolutely.
engineering and the geometry is designed to take it there.
There's absolutely an element of experience,
It's
repetition, and deliberate, intentional practice.
And then the ability to do it precisely, consistently, and over again.
So that you're only changing something in a small window. You're not making broad sweeping changes. We're making, so to that point, Doug, the only changes I found the limit very quickly of how late I could brake, because I do have a lot of trust in the car. So I go, I'm going to brake as late as I can, starting at just before the 2 board. I'm going to brake really late, and I'm going to overslow the corner intentionally. Because if we just brake a little late, all we have to do is keep our hands straighter for a little longer.
And you're braking to the end of the rumble strip, and then slowly releasing.
Yep, I'm releasing the brake
Right before.
probably somewhere in this area.
What are you saying though, for 5, if you go in and you brake late and you realize you broke way too late, you just keep the car straight. There's plenty of room to slow it down.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got a little bit further and still make it.
And just
It's a no shit moment, but
yeah, you still have room for that mistake to not end up in the room.
And I'll specify, I'm talking about a difference between 5 feet. 5 to 25 feet versus if you're still really early on in your learning curve, I would brake very conservatively for the most part, right? And try to just be very specific with moving your brake point up. It's very easy when you don't have great peripheral awareness to brake way too late, which has bad consequences in turn 5, because if you're in a fast car and you're approaching at a higher rate of speed than this, and you brake once the track's already going downhill, that's when you see people in this gravel trap, right? If you're in a 400 horsepower car and you don't brake until after I brake, you're probably not going to make the corner, right? An extremely important distinction in turn 5 we already talked about is where the hill goes down. Because what I find in most cars that don't have as much grip as this one, maybe don't have downforce, most of them require you to start braking before the track goes downhill. Because, and we'll talk about weight transfer again, we're on the gas. Let's imagine the track's flat and we go to the brakes, right? That's going to create a lot of G-force. The car's going to slow quickly. What if the track's doing this, right? It's going to take longer for that weight to settle. The springs are going to be kind of waiting, and now we're settling. So that downhill, if we're braking after the downhill, which very few cars do, our car, we're probably applying the brakes right at the crest of the hill.
Yeah.
So basically, in that situation, a few feet makes a huge difference.
Enormous.
Yeah.
Braking 5 feet before the hill going downhill makes a very big difference between 5 feet after. Right, so there's a space of 10 feet on the track that are very, very critical. And the vast majority of cars on sticky tires are braking somewhere in that 20-foot, 30-foot range. Even high horsepower cars will brake pretty late there with sticky tires. But as long as they get the weight transferred to the front before the track falls away, then they've already got that weight pinned over the nose, if that makes sense. Cars that don't have to brake before they go downhill, again, like Spec Miata, that's only not even 100 miles an hour through here, Spec 944 style car. Anything with really high grip and no horsepower is going to be braking after the track falls downhill. A Global MX-5 Cup car, since they won't be racing anymore with IndyCar, but they're extremely high grip. The newer Mazda MX-5s, they probably brake about the 1.5 board. So they're probably, if you say my brake input's right there, they're probably right
here.
Here.
Past the corner worker.
A little past the corner worker. But for the most part, all of us are going to be braking before the track goes downhill. So on a slow lap, it's really important to define where that point is. And I would recommend not pushing your brake point. If you're trying to find the limit of threshold braking there, I would recommend not pushing it past the point where the track goes downhill, because that's going to adversely influence what you're doing. However, in Paul's situation, he's 1 or 2 miles per hour slower at the apex than he needs to be, which makes a pretty big difference in a slow speed corner, not because of the speed being significant, but because if I'm carrying 1 or 2 more miles per hour and still getting the car to the apex, the car is probably using that extra speed. If I'm right at the limit of the tire, the car's probably sliding a little bit. And I can verify that with video. Slid a lot of it in some cases. But what you're trying to create, and something we don't talk about but it's a really interesting concept to leave here thinking about, is that in a slow speed corner, in a high speed corner as well, but in a slow speed corner more noticeably, our goal is, we already defined, we don't want to steer the car very much, right? It's like turning a rudder on a boat. You can't go as fast with the steering input. So I mentioned driving the car with the pedals. In a slow corner, especially in turn 5, our desired result is to get the car pointed towards the exit and get on the throttle as soon as possible, right? Getting on the throttle too soon is bad because we have to get out of the throttle. And that costs us a lot of time. That costs us more time than if we were to wait, actually, in those cases.
I'll find my back end sliding a little bit as I'm exiting.
Exiting. Think about delaying throttle application very, very minorly, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
One Mississippi.
Mhm.
So what I was basically getting to here is that what I'm probably achieving, that Paul is on the cusp of achieving here, is something that I call zero steer, which is where the rear tires are sliding slightly more than the front tires. So tires have to slide to create grip. When you're cornering, the tire's not just planted like on railroad tracks, it's actually sliding laterally across the surface. And that creates grip. The tire slides, and the granular part of the track actually has little, if you were to look at the track, I should have had a whiteboard back here that I can mark on, but there's little ridges in the asphalt, right? It's rough when you feel it. And so those ridges actually dig a little bit into the rubber, and that creates grip. As the tire slides, it creates heat, right? And that heating effect has the tire basically melting onto the surface. That creates what you would call laminar grip with the surface, right? So now the tire's creating two different types of grip. So we want to slide the car very slightly, very, very, very slightly, almost imperceptibly in some cases.
What are the last 2 turns? 11, 12, 13, is it?
Right over here.
At pit in. I mean, there you can slide it a little bit, and then you got the straight one.
Exactly.
Okay, all right.
And what you can do right here is the same that you can do right here. Same feeling.
Okay.
If you're already doing that there, you're releasing the brake and the car's turning, you're going, it's turning,
Yeah.
right? I'm not doing anything and it's turning. You can do that right here as well. I call it zero steer. I read a book that defines it as that. That was really good. If anybody wants to borrow it. Talks about the rear tire sliding slightly higher, slightly faster than the fronts. So basically the car's turning without you having to turn. Does that make sense? So that's to some point what we're trying to achieve right here. And so if Paul were to carry, let's call it 1 more mile per hour, that might enable the car to slide slightly more. I'm probably getting on the throttle earlier because the car's turning more sooner. And I'm going, hey, there's my exit.
Yeah.
Right?
I'm pointing in the right
And
direction.
he's having to wait just a little bit longer. That's a really difficult thing to approach, but we can all do it. It's concerted practice. But the biggest thing that comes with is that brake release, the way we release the brake pedal. Now here's something, we talked a little bit about this last time.
Sorry, it's brake release. It's not the input from the gas. I thought it was input from the gas too.
Brake release. Okay. Has anyone seen drift cars on TV? Let's for a moment pretend they don't have an e-brake and they're not doing a clutch kick. If you're trying to drift a car in a parking lot, if you're just trying to kick the tail end out and make it slide, what's the best way to initiate it? Initiate the slide. Look, what would you do with it? Say you're on the throttle, what would you do with your foot on the throttle?
Stay in it, wouldn't you?
Well, where's the weight go when you stay in it? You probably will understeer. If you have a lot of power, you can overcome that. But I would call that power sliding, not drifting.
Okay.
To me,
Got it.
drifting is defined as sliding the car deliberately before the apex, whereas power sliding is using the power to slide the car from the apex out.
So they're loading the nose. So that
They're loading the nose too much, and the rear end goes whoop, and they go, okay, counter steer, and then they use throttle. What does throttle do? Throttle puts weight on the rear, right? So throttle is actually going to make those front tires less effective. So it's actually stabilizing the car. Throttle is what stabilizes the car. That's why they add throttle, and you can increase the yaw. Decrease throttle, and the front tires bite more, right? Is this starting to make sense while we're talking? So drifters have a skill that really apply exceptionally well to this type of stuff. Yeah, it's almost backwards from what we think, right?
Just a question on that line through 5.
Sure.
Okay, it's almost like you're ignoring the first set of curving on the left, and you're aiming for the apex, sort of in the middle of the turn there, nicking that, and then tracking all the way out.
You want to see my video, and we can look at it from that
when you
perspective?
have time.
Sure.
Like that.
No, I can.
I never do that turn the same twice in a weekend.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about that. And I'm actually going to pull up the video from Paul. Would you mind texting me the link to one of our YouTube videos?
Yeah.
I guess mine would probably make sense.
I guess
this is what we're looking at.
You
So-
want your, the forward view, I assume.
Yeah. So we'll look at the GPS line is going to be a little affected by GPS positioning. I would say that you're correct in that I'm not touching that first, what we would call the first kind of apex here. I'm really concerned about this one.
Second apex is the cheater. I mean, you kind of pay attention to it because it's what sets you up to access.
Well, it's,
His glasses. Say that again, Doug, I'm sorry, I wasn't paying attention.
The folks that cheat, they get confused in that. If you can just begin to slowly focus more on the second apex as opposed to the first one, because getting the second one right is really what dictates all of your ability to get on this straightaway.
And yeah, to Doug's point, I'm not even back to full throttle at this point. Right, I'm probably on full throttle right here. That's right at that second part of the curve that juts out. Right here, I'm actually probably not. I'm probably maybe just before this point. I'm probably not on either of the pedals, which is something that I was going to talk about briefly. And we'll wait until Michael gets back, because I think that's a really important point. We talked about not coasting already, right? We don't want to coast, but I'm going to define coasting a little differently than maybe how we define it. Let's look at the video and just see. Have to go forward from the race start.
Would you say for that 34 minutes, I think?
For that fast lap,
Yeah, let me just look at your comment.
something like that. I got yellow gloves kind of intentionally, once everybody can see my gestures from inside the car, but
Pretty flashy.
they are.
Yeah, 34:30.
one yellow finger.
One yellow finger on the pass.
Zach, if you're watching, thanks for the yellow gloves. HMS Motorsports, appreciate it, guys. Here we go. Volume might help. Steering wheel's a volume knob right here. So we're looking at turn 5. The question was, are you ignoring the first apex? So right here, I'm on the brake. Let's say let's call my brake point the corner order station, which is directly, so I'm braking just before the 2. That's the end of the curve right there. So how far, and I've already got steering in the car, how far before the end of the curve is that? Probably 10 feet. Yeah, a little more than 10 feet. Maybe a little bit further. The camera tends to work.
Car lengths, yeah.
Yeah, depth probably 2 car lengths, 15 feet. What's my head doing right here already?
You're looking.
Yep,
You're
sorry.
And you're still,
I'm still on the brake pedal.
Look at your foot.
Yeah, watch my foot. I'm still on the brake pedal. You guys see that right there? Now what am I doing? I'm on the gas pedal. It's hard to see exactly where I am. I'm probably about 3 feet off of that first curve, probably about like that. And then my tire is on that concrete at the second apex.
But it doesn't stay there.
Just touches it. And then the car tracks out. And the car uses all the track all on its own. Yep, all on its own. So the whole concept that we're really discussing here is, yeah, I know it's not there anymore.
Yeah. A
The,
couple of them.
yeah, the whole concept that we're really discussing here is talking about driving the tire at the limit to dictate where the car goes on the track, not driving where we are told the car is supposed to go on the track and trying to do it over and over. Does that make sense? It's the difference between having the right fundamentals and just driving the line. The line is determined by the fastest guy. Let's be honest. Whoever goes the fastest way around the track That's the line that we're kind of replicating. And then we're adjusting it a little bit for slightly later turn-ins for safety, right? That's what we're teaching, which is good, because when you get out on the racetrack, the primary reason we have to teach that is because we're used to staying in a lane on the road that's a little bigger than the car. So we don't have to have a line, right? We just follow the lane. When we first get on the racetrack, we go, there's 4 lanes here, right? It's huge. Where do I go? Do I just drive around in the middle? You know, so that's why we teach the line. But what we have to adjust for, once we know, okay, I need to be left before I turn right, I need to be right before I turn left, then we have to make some adjustments, because we have to really think about how physics are working. Was that helpful for how that works?
Remember that in my head now, because when I watch folks, people go in there all different lines.
So,
And it's just, some are tight, some are out, some are wide, and I guess, but at least I have an objective in my head now is, okay, let's try this.
Yep.
It was interesting to watch. If you go back and trace Roman DeAngelis's track time at this track in the GT3 Cup, the release of the brake in turn 5 was the competitive advantage every lap. Every lap.
He was frighteningly faster than everybody else.
Frighteningly quick.
Yes.
Absolutely. I would 100% agree with that. The goal in turn 5 is to get to wide open throttle as soon as possible and stay there. And if you think about that as your goal, let's work backwards from that. So let's go backwards slightly from here. See if I can get this to open up where I can manipulate it better. Let's go back a little bit. So our goal is to get to wide open throttle as soon as possible. I don't know how far ahead this is going to take me. Oh, this is more difficult than it seems.
You can double tap and do 10 seconds.
Oh, really?
Forward or back.
Or you need to be driving like that. Play it. Oh, that didn't work.
Oh,
Hi, we're on the back, and we'd like to buy your home.
And his sponsor.
Yeah. So I don't necessarily need a video to reinforce this, but basically what we're talking about is our priority in a slow corner is to get to wide open throttle as soon as possible, but not have to get out of it. So if that is our goal, how many people, we'll back up from there. A lot of people will define their goal as exiting a slow corner as getting the throttle first, right? Getting the throttle before the next guy, getting the throttle as soon as possible. But that's not specific enough, because getting to throttle could mean maintenance throttle, which we know doesn't actually help the car accelerate. Our goal has to be getting to wide open throttle first. So if we work backwards from, we want to be wide open throttle as soon as possible, where that's going to back us up a little bit to what we just talked about, which was you might slide a little bit on the exit sometimes. So we're going to back up a little bit. That might mean that we have to delay throttle application slightly. In the middle of
Not if it's not as much.
Exactly. Delay it. Now, I'm not saying that we're going to wait, boom, at the throttle. But let's think about something. If we're thinking about the contact patch again, when I was in the middle of the corner there and the steering wheel is real tight like this, what happens if I mount the throttle right then? Yeah. Drifting. Right? Weight's on the nose, a lot of steering, throttle's going to go, ooh, whoa, right? So at that point, if the tire is at its limit, let's call it 1.2 lateral G, tire's at its limit, is it okay to be off the brake and off the gas? Is that okay? Tire's at its limit, cornering. Absolute limit. Other answer.
Yeah, it's okay. Why is it okay then?
The tire can only do one thing good at a time, right? It can either brake, accelerate, or corner. Now it can do a combination of those things, but it can't do them all at 100%.
Got it. Okay.
So if the tire is committed to 100% cornering, absolutely at the limit, can we do anything else? Can we ask it to accelerate? Well, what happens if we ask it to accelerate?
It breaks loose.
Breaks loose. What happens if we ask it to brake?
Thanks, guys. Understood.
So we're debunking the myth that coasting is always bad. So coasting, I define coasting as going into a corner, letting off the gas, going to the brake, lazy. That's coasting. In the middle of the corner, we can coast. But it's only going to happen for probably a fraction of a second.
You'd find it would be
It's just to allow you to
fraction.
manage the grip.
the transfer from the brake to the gas.
Yep.
However long that takes.
Yep. If our goal is truly to get to wide open throttle as early as possible, that might require that brief moment So when you see people start to slide exiting 5,
Just take that further, and the rate of acceleration of each car is altogether different.
Mhm.
Mine's very slow. It takes a long time to get there. So if I'm a half a second late there, I can't get it back.
So talking about that coasting moment, right? The most grip. Could you translate that to say turn 2 Barber, much longer turn, as a longer coasting moment if you're coming around that? And you know, you're just
you're
trying
at
to
the limit.
right. If you're at the limit, it's just a longer window
Yes.
of coast, maybe easier to achieve.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's think about it like this. If we're in a cop spec Dodge Charger on 600 tread wear all season tires, how long are we going to be coasting in the middle of every corner? Tire can't handle a whole lot. It's got a lot of weight. Yeah. We're going to be braking at the floorboard real hard. And we're going to turn in and we're going to wait.
Mhm.
And the tire's going to go, and we don't mind the hands, we're going to go back to the throttle, right? It's really exaggerated. But there's a big coasting moment in the corner because the lower the tread wear rating, or the higher the number of the tread wear rating, the less combined G that the car can take, the less accelerating and cornering, or decelerating and cornering, combined G. That's one of the reasons we like race tires. Race tires can accept more combined G, right? Let's go back to this and look at that. So that's a good concept to kind of think about. But to your point, exiting 5, like you, if basically that you're going to be penalized more for not carrying the right amount of entry speed. So with that in mind, you still have the same goal though, going to wide open throttle as soon as possible. And most cars, we talked about this last time, and Doug made a really good point here. If my minimum corner speed is 42 miles per hour, I get keep a step on. How fast would this is an M3 on 245, 200 tread wear tires, not super high grip. How fast is the minimum corner speed for an Indy car right here? Or an LMP3 car? It's gonna be a little faster, right?
45, 47.
Yeah, probably not 50.
Really? Not that much difference.
Not that much difference.
Because they don't have the downforce at that lower speed. So
They don't.
lost that.
When we're talking mechanical grip, you can increase mechanical grip by stickier tires, more contact patch. But usually the minimum speed in a slow corner is going to be very, very similar. I could do a rental car, I'd probably be doing 35 miles per hour in a rental car right there. And I'd probably be doing 46 miles per hour in a GT3 Cup car. So with that in mind, you've got the same limitation, same minimum corner speed that everybody else in the room does. But you're probably able to go to wide open throttle sooner and more aggressively. And now with the track the way it is right there, you probably only have to hesitate for a fraction of a second, and then you can go. I mean, you saw my foot on the throttle here. Was I eggshelling it? Bang. Right? We can watch that again if we need to. But there is so much grip. Our car in third gear will not spin the tires, and if I get the car pointed right on turn in, I just go to throttle. Right?
I mean, that little 202 that I had, if you got the right rotation, you were flat when you went back onto it. And then it would just, if you rotated it, if you timed it right, it would accept it. Because you were, at that point, you were basically pointed straight.
Yep. But it's the same exact theory because when we transition to power, now we've got the weight in the back. And if your car doesn't have a whole lot of power, it's not going to accelerate that hard, right? So you can go to throttle sooner and not disrupt the tires. Whereas if you got a lot more power or less grip, or both, you have to be a little more patient. That's a good example of a corner. You have a new thought process going into that?
I did. I mean, I did in the race. So, we'll
That's
see.
for-
But, good.
I was just saying for multi-class racing for our car, which is really high cornering speed, but not a lot of horsepower, especially relative to people we're competing against, that corner is really, really important because that's really the only corner on the track where horsepower really, really makes a huge difference.
What horsepower did you get?
220 wheel.
Okay.
So you really have to get everything out of it, otherwise you're going to be affected really negatively. Whereas some of the faster class cars, if we keep playing that video, you'll see me racing with cars with twice the horsepower, and they can overslow the corner, park it, and get out, and they don't quite lose as much. Now, they're still not driving the car at the limit, right? They're still not getting everything out of it. But
They're not getting the advantage of the back straightaway that they should.
Yeah, and that's why we go back to every car is a momentum car, because even if you have 500 horsepower, you're probably getting the throttle later than the momentum style cars, the lighter weight, higher grip cars, right? You have to slow more a lot earlier. But at the end of the day, carrying high minimum corner speed is still the most important thing, even if you're in a high horsepower car. Your priorities just slightly shifted. You're more focused on getting to the throttle sooner makes a bigger difference in a high horsepower car because you gain more ground. So you're really, really focused on strong corner exit, get the wide open throttle. You don't have to take as much risk on corner entry. Whereas in a momentum car, you really got to carry every mile per hour on the entry of the corner as more of a goal. Yeah. Turn 5 is one of those ones that's tricky. So here's something that I touched on that might be interesting to talk about. But if I'm just looking at dark red on the track, there's 1, 2, 3, there's 4 places where I see dark red. If I were to go quantify that by looking at longitudinal G on the graph, what we would see is the steepest, the most aggressive brake application, the most longitudinal G that we ever see on the track is right here.
Mm-hmm.
That's the only place where I'm abusing the brake pedal, right? I'm absolutely weighing anchor hard as I can, right? Mm-hmm. And when I say as hard as I can, I mean with respect to what the car will take. This car it's an E36, so it does have ABS. If you hit the brake pedal with too much force, the ABS engages and it causes what they call ice mode. The pedal gets stiff and the car stops slowing down. Basically, ABS is just activating. So you have to go, you're still aggressive, but you feed in brake pressure really progressively. Some cars are a little different. Most Porsches have really good ABS. So you can be pretty aggressive with the brake pedal. Pretty aggressive with that initial application.
The only time I ever feel my ABS is coming in 5 occasionally.
Occasionally? Yeah. That's good. You might feel it a little bit right here as you turn. You might feel a little ABS kind of pinching.
There, I wait till it shifts in the second, and then I go. I'm waiting for that.
Yep. That makes sense. That's what I would be doing as well. So that's something that we're, from a pedal input standpoint, this is, let's say, brake pedal, we got 10 units, right? 10 is maximum, 0 is no brake input. That's a 10 out of 10. And we define that as a 10 out of 10 because that's our biggest speed delta. But look at these other places on the track where we're also braking. But not quite as hard. So we talked about that earlier. We're braking in other places. Turn 5 is the only place where we're braking the brake pedal really hard. How many of us went into these corners, turn 12, turn 7, turn 1 for a long time, maybe still do, and just braked as hard as, braked as late and as hard as possible? Good. I certainly did at one point, right? Well, we redefined our priority as the brake zone's relatively small, right? This corner is very long. We want to carry all this speed, not just speed to the end of the straightaway. We don't carry all this speed. Same thing right through here. Paul, where would we think the other difference between you and I would be on the track? Again, subjectively, we could overlay me and Chris and see what the differences are, because that might be similar.
Yeah, I think historically we've seen 5, right? I think we've seen this turn for me takes a lot of commitment. So I think I'm losing some right there, just based on how I know. I know there's more there, and yet I repeatedly and consistently don't get there. So I think it's those 2 places, and probably entry speed at 7.
Right here.
Yep.
Cool. I'm gonna keep chatting. I'm gonna make a restroom thing. Here, you can drive this if you want to.
I'm not driving anything.
Or you can play this if you want to.
Yeah, put the video on.
Watch the.
Whoever edited that video did a hell of a job, though.
They sure did. There you go. I'll let you hit play. If you move that around too much, I'm not gonna have any entertainment while I'm going to the bathroom.
Really, they-
So you mentioned all the different ways to do turn 5 in Barber. That turn 15 is another one where there's, yeah, it's like 100 different ways to do it.
That's the next to the last turn. For me personally, that is the weirdest, most difficult corner on the track for me. It's like an illusion. I can't figure it out.
Well, it's 9:44, right?
Hey, Mason.
I'm gonna guess your best line is gonna be tight. You see a lot of people go out before that.
Yep.
In your car,
Different instructors
car,
are giving me,
I think all you're doing is giving up time and space by going out wide with the 944.
staying higher.
Tight, and then it's also another kind of trail break corner at Barber too, because it gets it to rotate. It goes, so it's a less break for longer. Get your back end out a little bit. Back on out.
That turn kind of goes back in on itself.
Have a lap with traffic, you'll see we all drive that corner a little bit tighter, narrower than a lot of other people. And all it does is allow you to get inside of them. So that right there is entry speed is something that I need to
right
work
here.
on. Yeah, so you see the line. This is what we all do, even without traffic. We're all kind of tight on that line.
Okay, that's different than what that's doing.
On Saturday, was it 56 cars, I think? Yeah, 56 or 58 on Saturday, and I think 48 started on Sunday.
Found anything to talk about?
We're actually talking about 15 a little bit. You know, you mentioned
Rotation.
how many lines at 5, then 15 is another one where it's on line.
This car in front's a much faster car, supposedly. So I stopped correcting for that as much, Paul, and I just used it. See how I did a lot of correction. The next couple laps we're watching, I end up with like almost zero steering and I'm already on the throttle, which really helps.
Just a curious question. You mentioned much higher grip from track surface. What were your difference in lap times between old versus new? Any idea? Same car?
We do. So a good, this guy was freaking moving road.
Yeah, he was. Half that for that.
Before, sorry.
So no traffic.
Okay.
See how, same thing. Gotta tell you, it comes out there a little bit wider as the brake and
Rotated.
stuff, but it's still a lot narrower than
All the way
lot
out to
of
the
the car.
cone, almost like a third of the track.
2/3 of the way to the left is a good way to look at it. So before we add, this car now has a wing and a splitter on it. Before we added the wing and the splitter, just the same exact, we didn't even change the, I guess I changed the shocks a little bit. The tires were probably much worse, actually. Our fastest lap in the race last year was a 44, 144.
I think that's right.
Our fastest lap before adding the wing and the splitter, I did 142. Just with the track surface change.
2 point something seconds.
And then we did
On worse tire.
on worse times. So the tracks are making it stickier.
Have any of you guys driven the new pavement? So you know it. I mean, it sounds different too.
It sounds different, yeah.
The bumps to me, getting the pump going up, turn 4. Was
Yeah.
a wake up call.
Yeah.
And juddery. So the key here is the noise is not indicating the tire's done, which is what's very, very odd. Usually that's the case. You hear that?
It's noisier. There's more.
Yeah, don't let that
Don't let that
influence your, yeah.
Yeah, don't let that influence you. Do you want to talk about this turn, Paul, or do you want to talk about 15? We have a consensus?
Let's see what we can-
So the thing that increased my speed on 15 was going back last year. Another one of our teammates and I and Andrew drove this car, this track, and Andrew was going to different points on the track and watching us drive. And one of the places that we adjusted and it gained speed for both Chris and I was going around 16, braking just a little bit sooner, braking less, but braking longer, and it's trailing and it's rotating the car. And once you got us doing that, we were carrying more speed throughout that. You remember that when you went back to?
Instead of waiting later to brake, you were
Yeah.
braking earlier with less.
So what were we doing before? I think we were coming through, straightening the wheel more, braking more, over slowing almost.
This is a freaking fast Miata. These guys are amazing.
It's so light.
You think you're doing pretty good, and here comes this Miata.
This
Well, he's
one's
also the SWAT.
yeah, it's got a K-series motor in it. Engine. Much better power to weight than this, unfortunately.
And
Watch him pull through the fast corners. He's got his foot near into the floorboard. This is the one place on the track I was faster than almost every time. That was the leader in class. So I had caught him. They ended up doing a 138 flat was their fastest time. We did a 140.
I should get this to.
that's a good bit wider than mine, too.
Yeah.
Carry more speed.
Carry more speed than.
That was me radioing the Miata's fast and letting him go. They had a lot more pace than we did. They're still more.
What's the better place than most of the
But that's a good example of a momentum car. Obviously, he actually has a better power to weight ratio than we do too. So corner out, he also pulls a pretty big gap on us. But that's because there's 180 horsepower on engine in it, and not the standard motor. Is there any place we want to talk about 15? I know you had mentioned 12 was a big difference between us. 12 we gained with the arrow like 8 miles per hour at the apex of turn 12, which is the left off the back straightaway. So it was pretty significantly different.
I'm wondering, you changed, you went from an E92 M3, right? Is that, yeah, is that your
I had E46.
E46? That's right, E46. And you went to you're a 911 now, right? What's the biggest difference for you? I'm curious about that. Driving Barber, what are you doing differently?
Well, I've only been at one time in my new car.
Was that at the IPS?
It was like last October.
Okay,
Turn off the AC.
that's good. Okay, so
I would say it had enough miles in it.
Gotcha.
It's a lot faster. Everything's happening faster, so that's what I can say.
So we've got 2 rear engine cars, a mid engine car, and then 3 front engine cars right here, right? And you say that. What do you have? What's your swap?
LS6,
Okay,
so it's about 400 to the rear wheels.
I haven't seen that car.
It's got about this much tire on it.
315s all the way around it, and no brakes, not enough brakes.
Yeah. Let's talk about 15 because that was where I think last time Al was really wanting to dig into 15. So we'll rub it in his face that he didn't make it. Talk about turn 15. So Paul, I think that's a good conversation point that we can talk about. So we're talking about this guy right here. I define 15 as this turn. I use the Porsche school turn numbers, not the IndyCar.
Yeah, why are there 3 different?
Every track, Mid-Ohio has a lot worse than we do. If you ever go to Mid-Ohio, every corner, no one agrees on which corner is which. It's the most ridiculous thing. If any Mid-Ohio people are watching on Facebook, figure it out. What's the deal? It's ridiculous. It's a pandemic that's sweeping the nation. So this is 15. Obviously, we're approaching third fastest corner on the track, actually, which just turned 14.
Mhm.
A lot of us might not.
Use all the curbing there.
All the curving, it's flat. Yeah, it's very
I
realistic.
do a shoot very late apex. I don't use all the curbing. I mean,
Do not use the curving.
Yeah, I mean, I do the curbing, but it's at the last piece.
Okay. Can I tell you that I early apex it pretty significantly?
Yeah.
Mainly because it's a corner where entry speed's going to help us a lot more than hurt us, and there's a lot of real estate out here. I mean, lots of it. If you get it wrong, you carry it too fast through there, just get off the throttle and just let the car slow down. It's no harm, no foul. You can see where my turn-in point is, which is before the stripe. And then obviously you saw the video, the line is just a little distorted from the GPS, what the GPS was actually showing us. So I'm putting the right side tires practically in the grass right there.
Almost all the way to the edge. And I'm kind of running almost at the edge of the concrete. I'm still on it.
Yeah, I mean,
And you're on.
I'm starting to slide it out, but I'm hitting it on the front end.
my goal is to put the right side tire right there. I mean, basically nip in the grass.
As our teammate Chris pointed out too, now, you run inside as much as you can, but right there's now a hole.
Yeah, you gotta be on,
make
you gotta
sure
stay on,
Yeah.
on the surface.
But the big thing here, so Paul mentioned when we were doing some coaching last March, I believe, that he and Chris both benefited. I went right here and I was watching their approach to the corner, watching where the brake lights went on, where they started turning in, where the brake lights went off. Watch what you can all see from this checkerboard area right here. And the main thing that I had them adjust was how hard they were applying the brakes right here. So before you'd say you were kind of.
It was more of a straightening out, harder brake application, and then back to it.
Is that something anyone else has at least tried with? I mean, I've certainly.
That's
done
the
it.
old school DE.
Yeah. Straighten the hands.
Straight the hands, turn it down.
Yeah. And I don't want to say that it doesn't work. It certainly can get it done. But if we're trying to respect using all the tires' capability, we can't approach it that way, right? So the big thing to look at here is just from this view, the radius of this corner, it never stops, right? It actually increases. So we know this is a tight, slow corner. This is a fast corner. But we're not slowing down a whole lot here, right? We're going from, let's look at our speed on the speed trace. I'll look at apex speed at turn 14, 82 miles an hour. And then look how little I'm accelerating. I'm only accelerating up to 84 before I'm starting to actually slow. I believe I actually had traffic on this lap in this corner, so this might not be a good one. I don't know if you noticed that in the video.
Andrew,
You went right by him. I don't
Yeah.
Andrew, if you already cleared the hill on this one going down, you're still going up.
Yes, this is right here. This is starting to climb the hill.
Okay.
So I'm going uphill now. Let's look at another lap and see if it's different. Nope, it's the same. Yeah, then we can use this lap. Yeah, so the goal here, see this orange right here? That indicates we're braking, but not hard, right? Red would be hard braking. Let's look at how hard. Negative 0.42. So this is the pinnacle slow trail brake release corner to get the car to turn, right? And we really, if we're not able to use the brake to get the car to turn here, we're probably having to really overslow the car to get it to turn. And then therefore we're probably slow through this whole area. We mess up our balance. So this is really a corner that's about balance. So this is downhill, right? We know this is going downhill. I'm going to switch back to altitude down here so we can look at the trend of the elevation. So good point, Mason. Mason's actually exactly right. We're right here. Altitude is just starting to go up. But look how steeply that altitude trace climbs right there. Look at that. That's how steep we're going uphill. But what happens right here? Yep, now we're going back downhill. This is really, really important. So 14, we're going downhill, 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 and now we're going uphill. So I'm in most cars, we're back to considerable throttle here. And in this car, we could actually turn in at wide open throttle and get the car there. But I didn't really like the way that it felt. The car wanted to push. I couldn't get it all the way to the apex. I felt like it was net slower than actually lifting to get the car to turn a little more. But then we're accelerating back up the hill. I like to use this break in the fence as a braking reference, not necessarily that's where I'm braking, but as I can use that. Yep, thinking about it, or some cars are gonna be braking just before it, some cars are gonna be braking just after it. But look how and this, I'm not saying this is right or wrong, I'm just saying this is how I approach it. The line does straighten out a little bit, and you notice my hands when I downshifted, I unwind the wheel just a little bit, but not very much. I went from this to like this, right?
Andrew, can I ask you a question? You're going up
Sure.
the hill and now you're coming down. You got the wheel cocked a little bit. Are you still going straight, trying to let it to catch when you turn?
Right.
To actually hit? Yes,
Right
right
here.
in there, yeah.
I'm trying to add as little steering as possible is the goal.
But after you're coming down and you're almost, because I clipped the cone up there.
Yeah.
Because I was
Really
coming in
far
close.
inside.
So then I'm turning my wheel to turn and the car's still going. Maybe
Going
just a
straight?
touch, Yeah,
Yep, and you're on the gas
yeah,
pedal.
exactly.
A little bit of understeer.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, the trick with this whole corner, we have to get a really late apex because we want to be track right again.
Mhm.
So our goal here is just like it is in turn 5. I'm on the brake pedal, and I only want to add enough brake pedal so that when I release it, the car is going to continue to turn, right? So the brake pedal is going to help the car turn. And I'm going to release it proportionate with my steering, and the car is going to turn here. So it's a delicate balance to me between braking too much and putting too much weight on the front will overslow the car because we're going uphill. So let's respect the fact that we're going uphill. If we brake hard, the car slows down really fast, right? If we brake really soft, we're not putting enough weight on the front to get the car to turn. So this is a balance. If you're looking at your longitudinal G on the track and you see a short red spike right here, that means you're going boom, brake pedal, and now the car's already too slow, and you lost all your potential to rotate with the brake release. Right? Does that make sense? So from a self-coaching perspective, if you pull up your data, all we're looking at here is longitudinal G, which is just right here. And if this is red, and then you see too much green before the apex, then you know that you're overslowing it and braking too hard. I definitely like to try this corner a million different ways, which is why I don't like to tell people I do it this way, you should do it my way. I think the approach is try a bunch of stuff, just don't be erratic, try a bunch of different things. Try straightening out your hands, braking hard, turning the wheel, try braking really late. It won't work, but you can try it. Try braking too soft, too early. But I think you'll find the happy medium is about a 4 out of 10 pedal, 4 to 5 out of 10 brake pedal, not very hard, earlier than you think, and then releasing it really slow, like you're turning and now you're releasing 4, 3, 2, 1 right here. Now you're back on the power somewhere right around. And again, the track now has more grip. I would say that if we looked at my data from last year before the repave, I'm probably this green line's probably only starting right here. But now the whole corner kind of gets backed up because there's so much more grip, having to kind of accommodate for that.
I rode with my instructor, and he was in I think, 86, 911 track car. He approached that one. He drove straight up, braked hard, and basically 90-degree turn to accelerate hard out of it. And he was saying, it seems counterintuitive, but he felt like that was the approach with maybe part with the rear engine car. But he up to the top of the turn.
He's going like this, braking,
and then took a hard right turn.
That's very popular.
It's the safest, least likely to create an incident.
Okay.
And so if you look at it, a lot of the old D go up there, break in a straight line, then turn down to make sure you are hugging the right side. But
So you go to the rumble strips all the way to the end on this turn?
no,
Right there.
I don't.
No, I've seen that, and you got tons of space in, between.
And the difference is that anybody that's doing any type of racing is you just let the entire inside
Exactly.
of the turn wide open.
Yeah.
So it's good to use both ways, and I agree with Andrew. Figure out where you can go and where you can't go, because you never know when you may need to go there.
Absolutely, yeah. Drive everywhere on the track just in case.
I'm always like looking to the right. I'm so concerned about where I am.
Late turning your head.
And then it's like, oh, it turns over there, and my eyes are here. It turns over there. My head should be like this, but I want to make sure where am I over here first? Then it's too mechanical. I'm driving mechanically rather than fluid.
Are you downshifting fourth to third there as well?
Yeah.
Most people are. Probably
I've tried both, you know,
Yeah.
leave it in fourth, see what happens, leave it, you know, downshift, see what happens. And again, downshift and break in the straight line, get that done, okay, now turn to
So the tricky thing with the way that I have found, and this is through looking at a lot of people's data, both fast, slow, myself, other people, I found that it's a common, basically you're never straightening the wheel. You're turning the whole time, which means you have lateral load in the car the whole time, which means you can't brake at 100%, right? But you also have to downshift, which is going to upset the chassis a little bit. There's a lot going on. So I find most of the time, if you're still struggling with the I need to look here, then I need to look here, and I'm trying to get that flow right, then what you want to focus on is eliminate as many variables as possible. So leave it in fourth and forget about lap time for the time being, and just get to the point where you're able to help the car turn with the brake pedal, right? If you're braking and you're turning, and now the car's turning more because you're on the brake still and you're releasing the brake and the car's turning, you're going, whoa, I didn't add more steering.
it.
Now we can start adding the downshifts. But until we get to that point,
And when in the car, what you turn around is you're downshifting and then you're upshifting right as you're exiting onto the straightaway again. And so you've lost that time of two shifts.
Yep.
That you really got to debate whether or not just carrying a little bit extra speed and eliminating
Leave it
those
alone,
times
right.
off.
Was it really worth shifting?
yeah.
Did you
It might
gain
not be
enough
worth
to
it.
make it worthwhile?
And in your car, probably very similar to the M3, the trick to fall into here is you don't have to slow down very much here, right? It's about,
I'm way over slow there. Everybody can. I slow everybody up there. For whatever reason in my head, it's like, I feel like I have to go slow. That's just me personally, my mental block.
this is a very challenging corner because it's got some
I hate that corner.
visual challenges.
Bulldoze it out of there and change it.
So
Just go through the
that's
lane
the more you
everywhere.
need to focus on.
Yeah.
If you hate it, focus on it. So you
Oh
don't hate
shit,
it.
here we go again.
It's there every
Every single lap. And the challenge with a slow car too is when you're not approaching it very fast, you're not braking very much.
Boom, the whole field's on my
Yep.
ass.
And it all disappears very quickly. When you're in a faster car, you're approaching it at a much higher speed. You do have to slow down more. So I find it a little easier to approach in a faster car because of that effect, I think. But in a this is 220 wheel horsepower, 2,900 pounds with driver, right? Not by any means a fastest car, right? The goal, I mean, look how early I'm starting to apply the brakes, right? I would define that as an early brake application. I probably could have gone a little further,
Because
actually.
you're still going uphill.
Yep, still going up.
What was that track?
But it's light.
That was with traffic. I was on the inside of that.
So that's another thing I like about this turn, though. You mentioned that there's so many different lines. There are so many different ways if you're coming up on traffic. Am I gonna take the inside? Am I gonna go around the outside? Where is he going? And it's such a long corner. You have so much time, and you can adjust. And I'm gonna go inside of him.
Yeah.
Nope. Oh, I can't
Am
do
I going to
that.
take him here? Am I going to
Yeah.
set him up for the
It's such a
run
fun
onto the
corner
front
because of
side?
that. I really
Plus you
enjoy
may
the
have
corner
somebody,
traffic.
you may have somebody going pit out there too on that particular lap. You
Yeah.
can't go there.
Yeah, Paul made an adventurous pit out at one
Pit
point.
in, yeah.
Pit in.
Pit in.
It was a late call for my team.
Paul, where are you on the track? 14.
We had an
Box this lap.
We had an oil issue on Sunday, so I was about right here when they called me to pin in. I was like, yeah, I can do that, and I mowed a lot of grass.
The official on pit lane came over to me and was like, tell him not to do that.
To me, Barber has the most dangerous pit in than any track I've ever seen. It is so there's two corners in a sharp right and a sharp left. It's just it's why do they do that?
The pro pit entry at Road Atlanta when they were
Pretty
running
sketchy.
that's very sketchy.
I would agree with that. So yeah, you definitely inside to the
They
right.
just, the only thing that it ensures that you are slow when you're coming down. pit.
Yeah. Right.
It isn't, you didn't make the first turn.
Right. And that happened at Indy last year. Somebody didn't. Entertain me for a minute.
Sure.
Go back on this. I am coming in.
Yeah, do some narration for us.
Right. So I come down here. I brake really late, maybe at 1. When I see the cone, I turn in, and I tap my brakes a little bit like here, and then I'm going out. Let's see where. And it's a late apex here on the rumble strip, and it's a real late apex here. And why do you apex before I do? How is that advantageous to you?
Well, I apex and this is a weird statement, but I apex as early as possible. You can carry more speed without compromising your exit.
Is that
Well,
true
this-
on any corner or there?
Most places.
I kind of treat this corner like turn 1 at Barber and turn 1 at Road Atlanta, where with the altitude.
You're talking about 12?
Yeah, right here,
Left hand.
at 14,
Oh, I'm
right here,
sorry.
I should say. And you can carry that in too, a little bit, and all those turns, turn 1 at Barber, it's falling away, you're losing grip, but what happens at the bottom?
You get more grip.
You get more grip. So it's almost like you're turning in at a speed where if there wasn't an elevation change, you're too fast. But it's gonna come back to you. Turn 1 at Road Atlanta is the same way you turn in and you're like, I don't have the grip for this, and then you do.
And then you do, yeah.
And this turn is the same way, so an early turn, you're turning in, it's falling, seems like you don't have the grip, but you will have the grip.
Yep.
And this turn is the same way, you know.
Turn 1's the same way.
Yeah.
Okay. I would agree with you on that. And also, I want to define when I say turn in early, I'm not saying I just turn in as early as possible, add a whole bunch of steering. I'm trying to add, I intentionally, when I tell myself, okay, I'm turning in, I add a microscopic amount of steering, as little as I can perceptibly add to the chassis to tell it, hey, we're turning, right? We're turning. It's this much. It's like it's almost a body motion. It's not even a wheel. It's a we're turning. And then the car kind of is now, I've already started the arc. I've already started to turn in. But this is for this corner in particular, but also this one. But now the chassis is ready to load the tires. So I'm not just going boom and then shock loading those outside tires, because this is a street tire. It's a 200 tread wear tire. It doesn't like that anyway. I've got to be a little more ginger with it. But that's already preparing the chassis for your turn in. So your turn in's already started a little early, but you've only added a little bit of steering input. So when I say turn in early, I mean I turn in slightly earlier than I would think, because of what Paul's saying. There's a ton of grip, gravity well grip level here and here that I want to take advantage of. But that means that I can carry more entry speed
But is it,
to optimize lap
Andrew,
time.
for me, when I'm turning in early, it's more of setting the tires than it is, or
Yeah.
beginning to induce the slide more so than early apexing. I'm not doing anything that's going to jeopardize my exit
Right.
at all. It's beginning to, I like to at least feel the slide of the tires so that I'm ready. I know I'm prepared to correct.
That's a very important statement. I'm not doing anything to jeopardize my exit. I'm turning in and carrying as much entry speed as possible without jeopardizing my exit. And there's a point of diminishing returns, just like there is with a late apex, right? Because to get a really, really, really late apex, we have to slow down more, right? So there's a diminishing return there as well. So it's really about, it's a compromise, as anything is at this point. It's very gray, but this corner is so fast. I'm sorry. And so many people overslow it. And this corner is pretty fast too. But I tend to, you can see how hard I'm braking, not much. Probably, you saw the video, probably a little past the 2 board. It's a breathe on the brake pedal. And then I'm out of the brake pedal, even back into a little throttle. And then I'm actually having to brake pretty considerably right here to get the car to do what I want it to down here.
It makes the suspension feel much more secure.
It does. It feels a lot better. It prepares the car to and I have entered this corner way too fast in this car several times and understeered, and then I'm late to throttle going up the hill.
And you don't touch the rumble strip on the right then?
This one?
No, on the right, further up.
Oh,
Yeah, there.
That guy? Usually not.
Okay.
I haven't tried it with the repave. It might like it. It used to be pretty significant before the track was repaved, so I didn't.
I just brushed by it, but
Yeah.
I do my turn in right there where the little road is.
Yep. Where the road is. Yeah, that's a good reference.
I'll have to try it.
The main thing that I see here that I believe people are misled by is bringing the car out here before they turn in too much, right? It's a compromise. We don't want to be track right and then turn to the right, but the grip level here increases dramatically because of the topography, right? The track levels is steep up there. And I find most people underestimate how much grip there is right here. And they don't add enough steering when the car will actually take it. So when those tires get pressed into the ground, you can add a lot of steering and you can squeeze into the throttle pretty progressively. And if you add a lot of steering here and get the car arced the right direction, then you're just unwinding steering all the way up the hill, right? And that makes it way less risk.
Yes.
Add more steering here. What happens when people get in trouble here is they either don't speed check enough, they don't slow enough for this corner, and then they underestimate how much grip the car has here, and they don't turn enough, and they're getting to the top of the hill, and they're realizing I'm running out of track out, I need more steering. And then the car gets light and goes in.
Because the crest is there.
Yep, crest is right here.
And when you come over a crest, and if you're at an angle to the crest, I don't like that. I feel a little jumpy. I feel a lot better. The sooner I'm parallel there, the more comfortable I am once I'm over the crest.
Absolutely.
Okay, you don't want to turn at the top of the crest or adjust at the top of the crest.
You just want to be relaxing. You know, you want to be opening up your hands. You want to be, the last thing you want to do is take your foot off the throttle, right? You want to be on the throttle. I had a stock
That's the
car.
closest I ever came to pissing my pants was right there. A lot of people have. Pardon my language.
Yeah. I had a stock car. I'm sure Doug remembers it. A late model style. Actually, there's a picture of it somewhere around here. Back then, that red Ford car, a stock car. It's got 400 wheel horsepower, nothing crazy, but it would spin the tires at 4 and right here when the car got light. It has a solid rear axle. It's not very sophisticated. So, and the first time it happened, it terrified me, right? I came out of the throttle and the front end bites and the car goes like that. And I'm looking up and I'm going, oh crap. You know, I had that oh shit moment where I'm like, I'm about to bite the inside wall. And then I realized that I'm almost open completely with my hands on the steering wheel at that point. And so then I just stayed on the throttle, right? And then landed and keep going. Right? It wasn't a big deal. But it was hard to convince myself to do that. But this is a high risk place. And I usually find it's because we're not teaching people properly that there's a lot of grip right here and we need to take advantage of it.
On the rookie, the natural tendency is to lift, and because you're going up over that, all the bad things happen.
Yeah, same thing as 4. Similar principle.
Exactly. When in doubt, do less. Just minimize. Don't change. But I do find that there's lots of people that are continuing to hold the wheel to the left to get the car over here before they angle back. And I think that one, this corner is so fast, you don't want to continue adding steering, right? Because you're carrying a lot of speed if you're carrying good entry speed. And 2, you don't need to, because almost every car cannot even really use how much grip there is right there. I mean, that's our peak grip level on the track right there, our peak amount of lateral G anywhere on the track. So the car is cornering more aggressively there than anywhere else. Whether to use the curb or not, probably a conversation for another day. Yes and no would be a good answer there.
And in the car, this little device, are you trying to get it green all the time? If you've got a red dot, you're like, hey, I can do more on that.
Through there,
Anywhere
in the corners.
You got red, you're like, oh, right.
Yep.
I can carry a little more momentum through that.
And we can replay that by pressing the button right here, right? And you can see where the red dots are. So that's one of the reasons that when I was doing my data review here, I'm looking at this area of the track going, I probably got a little work to do, right? Look at the red dots on the right side. Telling me that there's more, even on turn-in, right? So I've definitely had a little bit of technique adjustment to do there. That was the lap we had traffic, so I was
gonna say you were compromised a little bit.
Definitely was a little compromised. I would have liked to have gone out maybe a little bit further there, but no more than that. Where that left side seam used to be, I used to just put my left side tire on that left seam. Was kind of a good reference. I found 16 in this car in particular, it really wants to understeer there, and I found it to be probably one of the trickier corners for me to get right very consistently. But I find it all starts with how you get the car through here and avoiding too much understeer and avoiding driving the car out too wide here. You just have to fight it back. Does that make sense over here, though, what we're talking about, adding more steering down here? It seems counterintuitive, but I see a lot of onboards or have ridden with a lot of students where they just kind of go.
I'll stay out a little bit and then try to straighten it up. I'm going to try to cut that a little. Yeah, that's interesting.
I would definitely recommend and approach everything with a grain of salt, right? But I would definitely recommend just adding more steering there, a little more conservatively, instead of trying to open the radius up, just because of the grip level.
Okay.
Very similar at the bottom of the museum as well. Track out in the museum corner. When you're looking at going down the hill, looking at the museum, that corner does the same thing. It kind of compresses, and you can go throttle and steering together because there's so much grip level there.
That's fun there.
Already with the new track. I find that this corner, see how this progression, brake, release, brake, and then brake, release, brake, very similar, right? Turn one even, brake, back to throttle, big time, brake. But these cadences, how we approach the brake pedal, almost identical right here, just a little more than here. This is faster. This corner is way faster. This is, let's see, let's define it so we know what we're talking about. Let's see how fast we are at the apex of, that's the apex of that one, 94 miles an hour. And then the apex of this one, 76 miles an hour at the bottom of the speed trace. So I would treat both of these corners like fast corners. We don't really want to trail brake a whole lot here. You can see my brake inputs, not hard, but concerted. And then I'm releasing and I'm back on the throttle probably a little before the apex. So we talked about corner types earlier, fast corners versus slow corners. And we talked about fast corners are about balance. Slow corners are about releasing the brake to rotate the car on entry. We have to do that. So there's a lot of corners in between, which I would define this as. So we don't necessarily want to be trailing the brake pedal into this corner to get the car to rotate, but we also don't necessarily want to be on the throttle at turn in, right? Because that's going to put too much weight in the back. So most corners are this kind of in-between area. And what I find that going fast in these types of corners are all about are a really soft, delicate brake release to the point where your big toe is resting on the brake pedal before you release it. Big toe. And that's an exercise that if you haven't thought of it or tried it, just driving around the track, and although I'm going to do this session is every time I release the brake, I'm going to rest my foot as lightly on the brake pedal as I can before I release it. And it's a discipline. It's a discipline because it happens really, really quickly. So you have to practice it at a slower and off. Some coaches call it showing brake lights. I'm applying the brake pedal enough to activate the servo that shows brake lights. Right? You can usually tell where that is, right? And that's something that we like to, when we're trackside coaching and you have a radio, show brake lights, right? Brake lights right before the brake release. So in these faster corners like this, 75 miles an hour is enough, where if I keep the weight on the nose too much and I turn the wheel, front's gonna have a little too much grip, right? So I've got to make my brake release earlier. So all that to say, the faster the corner, the sooner you have to release the brake pedal. Does that make sense? The faster the corner is, the sooner we release the brake pedal. Cool. We want to talk about anything else? Awesome.
Just a question about Barber. Sure. Was Barber designed primarily for motorcycles and cars second?
Originally, and then somebody threw the idea out, if you make the track 2 feet wider, then you can put cars on it, and that was the advent of that.
Yeah, I think the
To
common
make the runoffs wide enough so that motorcycles have space to, before they're hitting something.
Yeah, I think the common misnomer is that it was designed for motorcycles. Originally, it was designed to be the test track for the museum,
And not a commercial venture.
not a commercial venture. From what I understand.
It was actually, this is the ultimate exercise in budget creep. Originally, the budget was 12 million. And he was just going to go cut a small test track to exercise all the bikes. And it kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And then Mr. Barber said, if you're going to, if it's, do it better than anybody else, or don't do it.
Yeah.
Wish my boss was like that.
Turns out you can recoup some of that budget loss if you make it big enough for any car. Not this year.
Yeah.
It's a real bummer. Yeah, so Barber's interesting because it doesn't have, there's not a single corner that's as fast as DIR, Watkins Glen, a couple of corners at NCM, Road Atlanta, but there's a lot of places like right here, the gravity kind of dropping into this massive amount of grip. Same thing at turn 1, same thing right here. There's not a lot of tracks that have corners like that. Lynn Motorsports Park has one. But those are really interesting places, and I find those places on this track really dictate how you have to approach it. It's an extremely connected racetrack, as in you're never braking, you're only braking hard once every lap. Everywhere else is a balance.
And you're turning to the right on all three of them, so you're loading the crap out of the front left tire. Doug, did you mention once there were plans to extend Barber?
That's a debate. Do you extend, to extend, or not to extend?
I'm sorry?
To extend or not to extend?
Where were they, which way were they gonna go?
You want me to show you?
There's 102 acres extended to the end of the track.
Over that way.
Yeah. Actually, there's actually paths cut through the woods that show where it would go.
You can see the loop back, just underneath.
Kind of hard to see. There's some trails out there for Mercedes, but because we run these trails for the Mercedes program, this obstacle course, you could see there was going to be a straight that would go kind of like this, and then there was this big area out here cleared, and then it was like they couldn't. There was a path cut to go back like this and connect it back here, but you couldn't really tell if it would go over here.
Oh, okay.
That was what I understood at least.
Yeah, they looked at, but I mean, there's another 102 acres that's out. So there's
Still
a lot
being
of
discussed,
flexibility. I think it just depends. I mean, I think there's some discussions about do you fill in the rest of the paddock area with the garages? You know, at one point in time, this track was considered for F1, and right when it opened, and at the time, I think Mr. Barber and Gene Holman both correctly said we're not quite ready to undertake a major event like that. I mean, there are things that they wanted to do, for example, declare the entire track a foreign trade zone so you could clear customs in the paddock, and then because to address something like that, and then you know what are the glitches, what do you need to do for parking? So I think there's clearly the flexibility. It's just a matter of what's the next path.
So did anybody learn anything, or is kind of self-reflecting, going, that's something I need to try, or I'm going to do something differently?
Yep.
Mind sharing?
5 and 16.
What are you going to do differently in 5?
Number 5 is, okay, don't worry so much about that first apex. Look at that second apex. Concentrate on 5. Is where do I start the brake? Where do I get off the brake? Where am I getting back on the gas? Can I do it next lap, next lap, next lap?
And minimizing that release of the throttle before the brake, right? The way I like to define how we enter this corner is wow, brake, right?
And you're going into the kink. Have you ever seen just as you see at the end of the back straight, depending upon your suspension focus, rather than easing all the way to the right, a lane in?
Entering.
I do.
Paul does that.
So one of my first, once I kind of got good, one of my early instructors was a racer, and we were looking at sort of the geometry, and steering input doesn't really require a whole lot of steering input. And he's like, well, you can come all the way out here and turn here to make it at a certain speed,
There's a little more
or we can come a little bit further inside, right? Say mid-track, maybe at that seam, and you wait a little bit longer for the turn-in because you're that much further before you join up. The car will still do it, and all we've done is just use less real estate. I mean, it's about real estate.
It's
So
the same thing as back here, actually.
Yeah.
Using all the edge of the track.
So I hardly ever, I probably am a car length or car width, maybe
Inside.
more to the left at that point. And the car still does it. And there's, on warm tires on our car, there's no lift. It's turn, and then it's a little lift right here, and then you're back. But it makes no difference. I've not noticed the difference in lap time or anything.
Because
By waiting.
the shift, depending upon the car, it
Yeah.
doesn't require quite as much.
I mean, on a lower horsepower car, I don't think you need to go out track right at all.
I think it comes down to the old karting, karters understand this way better than we do. It's like when you're really, really underpowered and overgripped, like indoor kart track, shortest distance, right? The shortest distance around the track would be to follow the interior side of the track the whole way around, right? So any way you can draw a shorter line is helpful. So I think there's a lot of validity there. Personally, I honestly haven't really tried it. I'm sure I've done it unintentionally a couple of times. But I usually try to get the car to track right, but it's more about opening up the radius for me. But I also don't have a karting background, so I'll probably, if I did more karting, I probably would try that. And honestly, I think it probably works. So when we overlaid our data last spring, the first time I drove the car, remember how much time you were gaining on me from here to the end of the straightaway? It was like almost a second, over a half second. Paul was pulling a huge gap on me there. And I was going, what are you doing differently? And at this point, I was lifting here, turning in, getting back to throttle, kind of doing the safe lift before turn in, squeezing back to power as I turn in, fast corner, safe way. And Paul goes, I turn in and then I lift. I'm like, what? And I thought about it, and then I kind of got brave enough to go try it. And then all of a sudden I was like, damn it, this works. But it's a really, really, really ginger lift off the throttle here, right? Because you're at 90 plus miles an hour. You have to be really, really delicate. But now I found that is the key, to the point where this is the minimum corner speed right here. Again, the same as turn 12, right? 95 miles an hour. And we've got more. We just got to dial the car in
Yeah.
to get it. But I do use all the entry on track right, and it debatable whether or not it actually needs it. It's just more of my preconceived kind of bias as to how I do it. So I should probably try it. The big place where I find that distance versus speed thing to be really important is this corner. There's a point of diminishing returns where if you go so far left, the car doesn't really need to go all out there. You're just having to drive further to get to the apex, and you're not carrying enough extra speed for it to matter. Yeah. So the best way I find to illustrate that is go do indoor karting. And you'll find, like, a good buddy of mine is a really fast dirt bike rider. And I went karting for his bachelor party, I believe, at Audubon. And, you know, I'm the race car driver guy in the group. And the first session, he's like 2/10 faster than me. You know, I mean, the track's 20 seconds, so 2/10 is, I'm like, man, what's he doing? So I get behind him in the next group, and I see that there's this corner that I was tracking out unnecessarily, right? I was driving the car to the track out point, and he was just holding the cart tight and going around the corner. So he was driving probably 20 feet less. And I followed him through there, and I went, that's it. And so the next time I went through, and I was like 3/10 faster than him. And I ended up beating him, like, overall, you know, on the 3, so I was very happy. But I realized that my driving heavier, more powerful cars on the track biased me to being ineffective at the go-kart track. But those types of things still happen. Like if you watch MX5 Cup at Road Atlanta has a long back straightaway. You go out of a tight right-hander, you go down a really, really long straightaway, and then you're turning left. You have to be right. You have to be the track right for the brake zone to turn left, right? So you track out left out of the right-hander, and then at some point on the straightaway, you have to work your way back track right. But that white line on the right side of the track is the inside of the track. That's the shortest distance. So these guys, as soon as they get out of track out, they all start migrating back over to the right? So with as little steering input as possible. Whereas a fast car, you pretty much run down the left side of the track all the way until you go down to the brake zone, right? Then you cross over because there's a big bend, right, in the corner. But the really low horsepower cars get over sooner because they're watching their predicted lap timer and they're going, if I get over track right, by the end of the straightaway, I've gained a whole 10th, right? It's really minimal, but they've driven less distance. But that's something that's really important because it doesn't matter how much of a momentum car that we have. I don't think there's really any car that needs to go all the way out here. I mean, Indy cars probably are they're super mid-track, kind of very awkward. If you watch IndyCar at Barber, you're like, it blows everything you know about the line out of the water. And it kind of demystifies the whole concept that it's not about, there's not a geometrically correct way to drive the track. You drive the tire at its limit as much of the track as possible.
It's almost like an illusion. How can they corner like that?
Yeah.
How can you do that?
They don't even touch the apex in turn 3. They're like a whole mobile home width off of the apex. I mean, they're like way out there. Yeah. Because it can carry so much more speed. They would have to dip down a few more miles an hour to get to the apex.
So it's primarily downforce.
Downforce, yeah. Yeah, because they're probably, in this car, let's say, we've got a decent amount of downforce, but nothing that works at 50 miles an hour. Right. So right here, we're at 54. 2, 3. An Indy car is probably doing 65 or 70, maybe a little more. But they have so much more effective airfoils on the car that they have downforce at that point. Right. So if they run a wider arc, they actually can carry more speed. And there's a couple of them that kind of go in, but I stood out on the spectator bridge and watched tons of them here, and most of them are like more than a car width off of the inside curbing. Which, you saw in my video, I'm like both inside tires up on the inside curbing, trying to use all of it. So that's just mechanical grip versus aero grip, but they have a much lower speed that they can use effective aero grip, so they don't necessarily have to do that. But if you watch them exit the museum here, they're driving the exact same place on the track that we do in mechanical grip cars because they're trying to put the power down. They're only at 40 miles an hour, right, and have to put the power down. it is pretty interesting. They'll do almost 140 miles per hour at the apex of turn one. Or I'm doing 82.
It's like how do we stick?
It's almost hard to believe.
But they can drive on the roof, I guess, after a certain 120 mile an hour.
At a certain level. A good story is a buddy of mine is a trackside engineer for Honda Performance Development. He was on Ryan Hunter Ray's car. He was his like calibration specialist, so he sits on pit lane with the headset on. He's got all the live data going in front of him, and you know he's a really good driver. He's done some track days. He has a Miata. He's really quick, and he said Ryan Hunter Ray was right here. He was braking into 15, which happens probably about right here in an Indy car. You know, so I applied the brakes a little bit earlier from about 80 miles an hour or so, right? We're starting to brake. So an Indy car is probably braking right here, and they're going much faster. But Zach said he had heard a radio transmission and said, guys, I'm in pit lane, almost crashed the car in 15. And it's like, had a big steering input, big bobble, carried too much entry speed. I caught it, but the car went into pit lane, right? Like he went in like this, and he corrected, and now he's in pit lane, because that's how fast he's going. And Zach's going, how did that happen? That's like an 80, you know, in his mind, he's just going, that's like an 80 mile per hour entry, right? In his Miata, right? Maybe 75. And he looked at the data and he went back to the spike in their steering trace and he saw like 32 degrees of opposite lock at like 132 miles an hour. So he went to, what happened was he went to the brakes too late, too hard, right here, and the front end goes, oh, too much, right? But he was going 130 instead of 80, right? So with that correction, all of a sudden he's in pit lane. And that really emphasized to me what that corner is all about. You can't brake late there and go fast. Right? You got to back up your braking marker because the track is not in your favor. It's flattening. It doesn't have a lot of camber. It starts to fall away actually, and that's part of the reason why that happened. But cool. So we got some implementation over here. Michael, anything?
Yeah, I'm gonna try your apex technique.
Here?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm coming into there as well.
Excellent. We have any mindset shifts or priority shifts about what's important, maybe?
I'm gonna try the toe on the brakes.
Big toe on the brake. I like that one. Cool. Well, I think it looks like we're thinning out, so why don't we go ahead and wrap it up? And you guys are welcome to hang around. I'll be around for another
Thank you.
little while.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely. We'll do more.
What does this mean, obsolete session file? Is it still good or?
That means you need a,
Yeah.
that means you need a session recorded recently. Yep, that means we need to get you a new firmware, I believe.
Whatever that is.
Was that on an old session that you clicked?
Yes, that was last
Okay.
year.
That means we did a firmware update on your unit. So these are going to be older.
They're still valid.
They're still valid. They're just older. But if you open one of your newer sessions,
Right. It's under the new stuff. Yeah.
then you're good to go.
All right.
Yep, that's all it
Yep.
means. Good deal. Awesome.
Now, this mounts on the dash or where do you want to put it? And then it's, is it an input or is it
It's standard
standalone?
battery powered. You charge it. For a DE, I don't plug it in. I just charge it and plug it in. You can certainly run a charger to the cigarette lighter or something like that. Yeah, I just charge mine and leave it on the dash, and then you connect it. So here, I'll show you. Look up
It
here.
talks to your iPad or computer.
Yep, it talks to your device. So all you do here is go connect, calibrate, and then drive. So I'm going to tap connect, tap Apex Pro, and now it's connected to the lights go off on this guy.
So I don't need my phone in the car or on my person when I'm driving?
You need the phone in the car.
In the car.
Yeah, okay. You do need the phone in the car. That's because there's no data storage capability on the Amazon device. Yeah. And you can use the phone as a lap timer as well. So when you start logging laps, you'll get lap times here. All right. And we just launched this feature. This is predictive lap timing. If you tap the little wand with the little delta sign.
The reason I asked is when I bought the car, it has some type of a GPS-based lap timer recording device on it, but it's old and it blocks the dash. I can only see part of the tack.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking of just taking that off and replacing it with something like this.
Gotcha. Maybe a TrackMate system.
I should have brought my information.
Yeah. So if you use your phone, it will auto locate you at the racetrack. So it'll pop up and it'll say Barber Motorsports
This
Park.
one, you have to press the button as you cross the start finish line.
Oh,
Which means I have to reach through the steering wheel to do that. And I'm not.
Oh yeah.
No,
This has GPS coordinates, so it just goes off as you.
You do it once and supposedly it tells you where you are. It's older technology. I'm sure it's at least 10 years old.
Yeah. Yeah, this is a little bit different, a little more modern.
I just riveted on there. I gotta figure out how to get it off.
Can you get behind it? Behind the rivet?
I can cook it.
And the predictive is, what does it show? Or do
Actually-
you have two numbers there then, what your actual lap is and what your,
Yeah,
okay,
so if, this is running lap time, so this is what
Right.
we've had currently. If you tap the wand, that's predicted lap time. So then what that'll show you is up here will be the lap time that you're going to do based on your current position on the track. So it takes a couple of laps and then it goes, okay, you ran a 1:45.0. Based on where you are this lap on the track, you should do a 1:45.5.
In the video, it
Yeah, it was in the
shows up
video.
pretty clear on the video what the
It'll turn red when your predicted time is slower,
got it,
and it'll look like it'll turn white when it's faster.
okay.
And that'll show you what your predicted lap time will be. So that's another way you can, it's easier to see on a straightaway than the apex lights. You can come out of 5 and you can go, oh, that exit, that'd be more lap time.
Mhm.
But I definitely encourage people not to overuse the predictive in real time. It's really once a lap kind of thing to check. Or maybe a critical corner. Hey, I'm working on turn 5. I'm gonna look at predictive after the exit. I find the LEDs are way easier to see on the apex. If you want corner feedback, like the brake release thing, if you're seeing a red light, on corner entry, soften up that brake release, get that really delicate brake release and just watch those lights start to kind of go away. That usually is what fixes it. But yeah, there's also other features. So this is how you upgrade the app right here. And then it also has other features in here. So I have I can look at sector times. I can compute a personal or optimal lap. So I've got all my laps here, and now they're divided into 6 sectors. So that's what the different little boxes are.
In the green, that's your best lap, or that's your best sector.
Yep, exactly. Green is the best sector on that lap, and then that lap time right there, 1:39.43, is if all my sectors were added up, all my best sectors. So my fastest lap was a 1:45.6, but if I added up all my best sectors throughout the session, I do a 1:49.43.
And the percentages there, the 77, 76, that's.
Apex percentage, so red lights divided by green lights. Got it. It's always going to be less than 100 because you see red lights on the straightaway. And I'm a little under where I really want to be. I think this car should easily be a 78, 79 consistently down here.
And you know that because you've got some up there.
Yeah, okay. And also if I go to Barber Motorsports Park right here where I see the track list and you tap the track name, you'll see the Apex Score Par, which is an aggregated average of all the data submitted. So 79 is the average, which is pretty high.
So where would I go from here? You see that?
Apex Pro in the top left,
Okay.
and then tap Tracks and Records. And then scroll down to see Barber and then tap on Barber, and you'll see all that information displayed. I do think Hayes was telling me that his tires were shot, and he's going, I don't know if this is correct. This is the proper Apex score. It feels awfully high. I was like, 88 is really, really high. So maybe we'll see. This 130.5 is moving pretty good.
Why wouldn't there be any data there on mine since I have lots?
This is only going to be the top 3 best times and best Apex scores. But to get your data there, you can go to data and then swipe over the session and then tap top 10. And that'll submit. Unfortunately, this was not a winning record. I tried. So that's how you submit your data. And then there's a top 10 list on our website too, of the top 10.
ApexPro.com,
ApexTrackCoach.com.
TrackCoach.com, okay. Everything there.
It all lives there.
I'm still old fashioned. I like business cards. Thank you very much, Roger.
No problem.
So by chance, do you know Charlie Cook, Southwind What Racing?
I know of him. I don't know him personally.
He's the one that basically put the bug in the ear about if you could make the track 2 feet wider. This was the Christmas season before the track opened. I stopped in and was visiting Charlie, and as we're talking, whatever, another fellow walks in. Charlie's like, oh, hey, I hadn't seen you in so long. It was, I think, Lee Clark.
Yeah.
So I'm the fly on the wall as Lee's telling him stories of, one of them was the concrete finisher came in and saw how beautiful the track is. So they did an extra special job of polishing the concrete. And the next day, they're all looking at it, and I guess it was with George Barber. You know, they're all proud of the extra job they did, and they're like, you do know we race in the wet. So they had to tear it all out and redo it. But there were several stories like that he was telling that I was like, wow, you know, interesting, cool.
Yeah. Porter Fell tells me about Charlie all the time.
I was, I do woodworking, or I guess did, maybe I do. And I was at an auction for wood equipment, and there's this guy, you know, Charlie looks like your basic accountant or whoever, and kind of standing next to me. He had seen me at art shows, so he struck up conversation and got to the point of conversation. I said, so what do you do for a living? He says, I build race cars. I'm like, really? And at that time, there was BIR and maybe Lassiter Mountain. And my neighbor's building a drag racer, whatever. So I'm like, who do you build for? He's like, well, I'm under contract with Chrysler. This was the first year the Vipers came out, and he built the first Vipers that raced at Le Mans, Daytona, et cetera. And, you know, the shop's over on First Avenue North, just an old kind of block, long, low building near Granger. And, you know, he's telling me that, and I'm like, and that old building's like, that's by design.
Yeah.
You know, we don't want walk-in kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But, you know, that was right. It was shortly after that I went and visited him there, and it was shortly after his contract ended. But there was a race-prepared Viper. There was a crate motor sitting in the middle of the floor. In the back of the shop, there's shelving with all the spare suspension, body parts, stuff that they just, you know, when his contract program was over, it's all the parts of his to, you know, do what he wishes with. But it was interesting.
Yeah, interesting. I worked for Lee Hurley for a while, who's been in motorsports here forever. So we're still live on Facebook. Lee, he's awesome. He's got lots of friends, and he also has lots of not friends, which is okay. He's a very big personality. But I'm gonna go ahead and shut the video recording off so we can.
I didn't realize, I used some language I shouldn't have.
Oh, no, you're good. It's
I think I said shit.